Somewhere far beyond the ticking of ordinary clocks, the multiverse sighed. A soft, almost imperceptible ripple shimmered across countless dimensions, like the quiet exhale of a dream no one yet remembered. It was the kind of ripple that made the stars pause for a moment, twinkling a little differently, as if acknowledging a secret only they could understand. And perhaps somewhere in the quiet of that ripple a boy was watching. We truly love and care for you. Before we begin the story, tell us, where in the world are you watching from and what time is it there? Now grab your coffee or tea, or perhaps just the comforting warmth of your blanket. And let's get started. Let's drift gently into a tale that moves not in leaps and bounds but in soft, floating sighs. In one small corner of the multiverse, tucked between two worlds that had almost forgotten each other, there lived a boy named Rick. Not the Rick of reckless adventures and exploding inventions you might imagine, but a quieter version, a softer echo. He had hair like pale lightning, a mind already stretching toward questions too big for anyone his age, and eyes that flickered with curiosity, like stars trapped in a jar. Rick's world wasn't exactly ordinary. Hallways curved at impossible angles, leading from one glowing portal to another. One moment he would be standing on the edge of a violet meadow, where the grass hummed like a lullaby, and the next, he would find himself floating above a river of liquid light, its current carrying whispers of forgotten stories. These places weren't frightening, they were calm and strange, soft and full of secrets that invited him to look closer, to breathe deeper. It was in the quiet hours, just before the first sigh of dawn in most worlds, that Rick felt the ripple most clearly. He could sense it in the air, a subtle tremor that made the stars wink, and the portals shimmer with gentle invitation. He didn't fully understand what it was. Maybe it was the multiverse noticing him, or maybe him noticing the multiverse. Either way, it filled him with a soft awe that made his small chest feel like it could expand across dimensions. As he wandered, his footsteps were silent, yet he knew that in every shadow, every flicker of light, there were layers of story waiting to be discovered. Some shadows whispered in tones only children, or the endlessly curious, could hear. They spoke of places that might never exist, of worlds where a single choice could ripple forever, of gentle acts that carried more power than anyone could imagine. Rick listened, sometimes responding with a small nod, sometimes simply letting the whispers carry him forward. On one particular evening, he paused at a small, unassuming portal, tucked behind a silver tree whose leaves glimmered like dusted stars. The portal wasn't large or flashy, but it vibrated faintly, humming with a gentle warmth that felt like a hug from a long-lost friend. Rick reached out a tentative hand. The moment his fingers brushed the soft light, a tiny ripple echoed through the multiverse, a quiet hello that made the nearby stars wink in acknowledgement. It was then that he remembered the sandwiches. Even in a place as strange and fluid as this, certain comforts remained. In the corner of his small bag, wrapped carefully in a napkin, were two triangular sandwiches, one peanut butter and one something his younger self couldn't yet name but knew he would someday appreciate. They were ordinary in an extraordinary world, yet somehow they anchored him, reminding him that even amidst the bending corridors and shifting skies, there were small things that made a world feel like home. Rick didn't always understand the voices of the multiverse. Sometimes the portals sang in languages of colors and textures that made no sense at all. Sometimes the stars hummed in tunes that only his bones seemed to hear. But he felt them deeply, and in feeling them he grew a little. He learned to pause in wonder, to notice the gentle drift of light across a horizon that might not even exist in any ordinary sense of space. He learned that curiosity, patience, and quiet listening were themselves kinds of power, subtle but far-reaching. In that quiet corner, he also began to sense the first hints of companionship, though not in ways that could be measured. He would often leave small notes in the air, words floating like feathers, hoping that one day someone somewhere might read them and feel less alone. These messages were simple, almost invisible, yet they carried kindness strong enough to ripple softly through multiple realities. The ripple in reality that evening was different. It lingered longer, pulsing gently as if waiting. Rick tilted his head and whispered softly, "Hello there." Not to a person, not to a creature, not to the portal itself, but to the universe as a whole. And somewhere, somehow, he felt the ripple answer back, not in words but in warmth. in the faint brush of light against his cheek, in the whisper of stars that seemed almost like applause, and in that answer, Rick understood something he would carry with him forever, that there were no coincidences here. Every ripple, every whisper, every tiny glimmer of light had a place, a purpose, a reason to exist, even if it was hidden beneath layers he could not yet comprehend. And that was enough for now. Enough to make him smile, tuck the sandwiches safely back into his bag, and step lightly toward the next softly glowing portal. As the stars winked and the corridors curved once more, Rick realized that the multiverse wasn't a place to conquer or control. It was a place to wander, to notice, to learn slowly, like breathing in and out in perfect rhythm. Each ripple, each whisper, each quiet glimmer was a story, waiting for him to touch it with gentle curiosity. And maybe, just maybe, in the vastness of infinite possibilities, he could learn to touch them without ever disturbing their delicate balance. He paused at the edge of a small floating platform, suspended above a river of light that hummed a lullaby he didn't fully understand but felt in his chest. He leaned against the soft curve of the platform, closed his eyes and let himself drift. The ripple remained, faint but persistent, a gentle reminder that even across infinite worlds, there was always room for quiet awe, for small wonders, for soft connection. Somewhere, in the quiet spaces between stars, Rick felt a soft exhale. And in that exhale he felt himself stretching just a little, growing just a little, preparing, without urgency, without fear, for the adventures that would slowly, softly unfold. And the multiverse waited, patient and kind, as a boy with pale lightning hair took his first small steps into the extraordinary, yet calm, unknown. The multiverse has a memory. Even before most beings are aware of it, it remembers the first curious steps of those who wander its corridors. For young Rick, those first steps were quiet, careful, yet full of wonder. The hallways he wandered as a child curved in ways that made no ordinary sense, bending like smoke, stretching like soft elastic, and folding over themselves in gentle, impossible arcs. Sometimes a corridor would seem familiar, and the next moment it would shimmer into something entirely new, yet still comforting like a half-remembered lullaby. Rick would often pause, leaning against the smooth walls of the corridors, which hummed faintly under his fingers. The hum was soft, like distant music that didn't need to be heard fully, only felt. It seemed to say, "You are safe here. Take your time. Watch closely," and he did. He watched the glowing lights that traced along the curves, the small portals that blinked in and out, the way shadows stretched and contracted like breathing companions. In these corridors, Rick learned early that curiosity could be a quiet power, not the loud, explosive kind that later generations would hear about, but a gentle, insistent curiosity that stretched him across dimensions, nudging him to notice small details others might overlook. Sometimes it was the way a soft cloud of dust glowed when sunlight passed through a hidden portal. Sometimes it was the way a faint ripple of light danced across the edge of a hallway, as if the multiverse itself was waving hello. There were days when the corridors felt endless. Rick would wander from one softly glowing room to another, discovering corners filled with tiny wonders. One such corner had walls that whispered faintly, recounting stories that might have been dreams, or perhaps the memories of worlds long forgotten. Rick would sit cross-legged on the polished floor, listening, letting the whispers settle like a blanket around him. He could not always understand them, but he understood their feeling, the gentle care behind every word. Sandwiches became his companions, small comforts in the vast, drifting corridors. One day he found a little table tucked behind a portal that shimmered like water in moonlight. On it rested 2 triangular sandwiches, wrapped in soft paper. He didn't know who had left them there, or if the multiverse itself had arranged them, but he ate them slowly, savoring the familiar taste while the corridors whispered around him. Even in strange places, some things remained grounding, small tokens of home. And then there were the clouds. They floated in places they shouldn't have been, hovering inside hallways, curling around doorways, spilling faint light across the floors. Rick would reach out, letting the clouds slide through his fingers. They felt soft, cool, alive in a way that reminded him of laughter, fleeting, ephemeral, yet infinitely precious. Sometimes he would close his eyes and imagine drifting on a cloud, soaring across the infinite corridors. letting himself move without thinking, just feeling. Rick's abilities, though subtle, began to manifest during these childhood explorations. He could sense the shifts in dimensions before they happened, notice the ripple of an approaching portal, or intuit the small emotions carried by a shadow as it moved across a hallway. These powers were not spectacular. They were gentle, almost invisible, yet they made him different. And being different in a world as quietly strange as the multiverse was, in some ways exactly what he needed. One day, he found a corridor that seemed to hum more brightly than the others. He followed it, stepping carefully over the soft glow that lit his path. The corridor curved upward, then downward, then twisted in a spiral that felt both dizzying and comforting. At the very center, he found a small window of light, framed by walls of softly pulsing energy. He pressed his face to it, and through it he glimpsed countless worlds, some bright, some dark, some impossibly small, some stretching infinitely. Each world carried its own gentle hum, its own ripple of memory, and in that moment Rick understood that the corridors were not endless by accident. They were invitations. Invitations to notice, to learn, to grow quietly. In these hallways, Rick learned patience. Sometimes a portal would open, revealing a new corridor he wanted to explore immediately, but he waited. Sometimes the clouds drifted slowly across the floor, and he would pause, letting them pass before moving on. The multiverse was not a race, and he was not in a hurry. Every step, every pause, every soft inhale of the cool, humming air carried meaning he could feel in the very bones of himself. Though the corridors were often quiet, they were never lonely. Shadows moved alongside him, gentle shapes that sometimes seemed to smile. A flickering light might trail him, playful, silent, guiding him without force. And through it all there was the faint, comforting echo of a lullaby, threading through the spaces between walls, portals, and clouds. A reminder that even amidst wonder and strangeness, there was always a heartbeat of calm, a rhythm that could carry him to sleep when the day became too vast. Rick sometimes paused to imagine the future, though he could not name it yet. What would he become? Who would he meet? He did not know, and yet he trusted that the corridors themselves would carry him gently and safely toward the answers. Each turn, each ripple of light, each soft hum of a passing portal was a small thread weaving the tapestry of his life, subtle but resilient. As evening fell across the corridors, though evening was a curious thing here, bending across dimensions rather than following the sun, Rick found a small nook lined with soft, glowing moss. He lay down, sandwiches resting beside him, clouds drifting lazily overhead, and allowed himself to float in the gentle rhythm of the multiverse. There were no loud adventures here, no rushing or explosions. Only the slow, careful unfolding of a boy and his world, a world that whispered back in kind. And in that quiet, infinite moment, Rick felt a sense of belonging that was deeper than any noise or movement. He felt the corridor's subtle approval, the hum of unseen lights, the playful drift of clouds, and the tiny, powerful beat of his own heart. This was where he belonged, in the gentle folds of the multiverse, learning, growing, and stretching, softly, quietly, endlessly. Somewhere across the curved hallways and drifting portals, the multiverse sighed again, not with urgency, not with drama, but with patient acknowledgement that this boy, this young Rick, was beginning to notice the threads that bound everything together. And in noticing, he was already beginning to shape them, ever so lightly, ever so kindly, like a hand brushing against a field of stars. And as he drifted to sleep in the glowing nook, the whispers of the corridors settled around him like a soft blanket, the faint hum of the hallways a lullaby, and the gentle glow of the portals painting dreams across his closed eyelids. He carried with him the first seeds of wonder that would someday stretch across dimensions, softly and unassumingly, like clouds drifting across a sky that no one else could quite see. Even in a multiverse that stretched beyond comprehension, quiet companionship had a way of finding its way into the smallest cracks. For young Rick, the corridors he wandered were usually empty but alive with whispers and light. Yet one day, he noticed a small, trembling presence at the edge of a softly glowing portal. At first he thought it was a shadow, moving just slightly differently than the others. But as he approached, the presence shifted, revealing itself as another child, curious, hesitant, and somehow familiar. Though Rick had never seen them before, this was Morty, or a Morty-like figure. a companion who would slowly grow into the subtle center of Rick's adventures. He had wide eyes that reflected the strange light of the multiverse, and a small uncertain smile that made him seem like a fragile comet drifting among the infinite stars. Rick didn't know it yet, but the bond forming here in this quiet corner of reality would become a tether across countless worlds. Rick extended a hand gently, and the other child hesitated before taking it. There was no rush, no loud announcement of friendship, only the quiet acknowledgement of two beings recognizing each other in the folds of an extraordinary world. Rick didn't speak at first because words felt unnecessary. Instead, he simply let the other follow him as he wandered further into the corridors, past glowing portals and floating clouds, past whispering shadows that seemed to lean closer in curiosity. Their first adventure together was quiet, yet strange in the way only a multiverse could be. They stumbled upon a hidden planet, one that existed between moments of time and space, draped in soft violet light and a river that glimmered like liquid glass. Rick and his companion sat on the edge of the river, listening to its gentle hum. No words were needed. They simply shared the feeling of being small in a vast universe that stretched endlessly around them. In that silence, Rick realized something essential. Empathy did not always require language. He didn't need to explain the currents of light, the subtle hums of the portals, or the whispers of the multiverse. He simply felt them, and in that feeling he knew that his companion felt them too. They could understand each other without speaking, a quiet miracle in a world that often tried to overwhelm with noise. They explored corridors together, walking through spirals that twisted impossibly, clouds that floated like drifting thoughts, and small nooks filled with faintly glowing moss. Rick pointed out tiny details, the way a portal rippled like a soft sigh when crossed, the way a shadow stretched lazily as though it were breathing. And in these gentle observations, a quiet trust formed. His companion began to follow the small cues, noticing things that most would have overlooked, and Rick felt an unexpected warmth in their shared wonder. Sometimes, they would pause and sit in a nook, letting the corridors hum around them. Sandwiches were shared, simple tokens of grounding in an otherwise fluid, endlessly shifting reality. One day, Rick passed a triangular peanut butter sandwich wrapped in soft paper across to his companion, who accepted it with a shy nod. In that small ordinary act, they understood something extraordinary, that care and attention, even in silence, were powerful forces that could ripple across dimensions as surely as any portal. Even the shadows seemed kinder when they were together. They moved in gentle, synchronized patterns, sometimes forming faint shapes that looked almost like comforting hands reaching out. Rick's companion learned to notice them, to feel their subtle presence and to let them guide the way. There was no danger, only observation, quiet awareness, and the shared understanding that even in the infinite multiverse they were not truly alone. One evening, they discovered a library tucked behind a softly shimmering portal. It wasn't large or crowded. It was serene, almost sleeping, with shelves of glowing books that hummed faintly in acknowledgement of visitors. The books weren't filled with ordinary knowledge. They contained memories, whispers of other worlds, small secrets that only a patient, curious heart could understand. Rick and his companion wandered between the aisles, reading the soft glows like language, feeling the gentle pulse of wisdom and time. Through these quiet adventures, the bond deepened. Rick noticed how his companion laughed softly at small discoveries, how their eyes would widen at a softly glowing corridor, how a small hand would reach out to brush a drifting cloud of light. And in return, the companion noticed Rick's care, his patience, his ability to slow down and truly observe a world that often demanded speed and chaos. It was the beginning of a partnership that needed no loud declarations, just presence, empathy, and shared wonder. Even as they wandered, the multiverse seemed to acknowledge them. Portals shimmered more brightly in their presence. Clouds drifted lazily around them in patterns that felt almost playful, and the faint echoes of lullabies, like distant stars singing, threaded themselves softly through the hallways. Rick felt that these small, quiet miracles were part of what he was meant to notice and share, and he knew in the deepest part of himself that he would never truly walk alone again. One day, as they sat at the edge of a glowing platform above a river of starlight, Rick whispered softly, "We're small, but we're here together. That's enough." His companion nodded, not with words, but with the weight of understanding that filled the space between them like sunlight spilling across a quiet meadow. And in that moment, Rick understood a truth that would carry him across countless dimensions. Companionship was not always loud, not always thrilling, not always declared. It was quiet. It was steady. It was like a gentle ripple in a vast, infinite sea. As night, or what passed for night in a corridor that curved through dimensions, fell around them, they lay back on a floating cloud and let themselves drift. The corridors hummed softly, portals glimmered faintly, and shadows leaned in, protective and watchful. Rick held a small sandwich loosely in his hand, while his companion traced the patterns of light above them, with wide, fascinated eyes. The multiverse itself seemed to sigh, a soft exhale of calm recognition that two beings, small but endlessly significant, had found one another. In that quiet corner, amidst corridors that twisted impossibly and clouds that floated like drifting thoughts, Rick and his companion began to understand the rhythm of existence. They learned that wonder could be shared in silence, that small gestures carried enormous power, and that even in a multiverse filled with infinite possibilities, connection was the softest, most enduring magic of all. And as they drifted into the gentle lull of an unhurried, softly glowing world, they felt a warmth that would linger forever, like a ripple that never fades, a whisper that always returns, and a quiet promise that no matter how vast the corridors, they had found something eternal in one another. In the quiet folds of the multiverse, shadows rarely stood still. They whispered gently, curling along walls, stretching lazily across glowing floors, and hovering at the edges of softly pulsing portals. Young Rick had long learned not to fear them. Shadows were not ominous here. They were companions, guides, and sometimes the keepers of secrets too delicate to be spoken aloud. One evening, as he wandered the corridors with his companion by his side, Rick noticed a shadow moving differently than usual. It flickered and stretched, pausing as if listening, then leaned closer in a soft arc. He knelt, letting his hand hover near the dark shape. The shadow responded, flowing around his fingers, warm and alive in a way that made the corridors feel even more intimate. It was a small revelation. Even shadows had stories to tell if one took the time to notice. The companion watched with wide eyes, hesitant but curious. "It's alive?" they whispered, voice small in the humming corridor. Rick smiled softly. "Not alive like you or me," he said. "Alive in ways we can feel if we're patient. They're full of secrets we're just beginning to understand." And with that, the two of them crouched, letting the shadows curl gently around their hands, listening to the soft, almost musical murmurs that seemed to flow from nowhere and everywhere at once. These shadows taught them patience, subtlety, and observation. They revealed small patterns in the corridors, how light bent, how portals shimmered differently when approached with calm attention, how even the faintest ripple could carry a meaning too delicate for words. Rick realized that these patterns mirrored the multiverse itself, quiet, intricate, and filled with lessons for those willing to notice. Sometimes the shadows showed fleeting glimpses of other corridors, other worlds, almost like reflections in a softly rippling pond. Rick would trace them with his fingers, feeling the gentle hum of dimensions brushing against his fingertips. His companion leaned closer, fascinated, learning to feel the currents of these unseen places. Empathy, Rick knew, was a power in itself. It allowed them to sense without seeing, to understand without speaking. As they wandered further, the corridors began to twist in ways that seemed almost impossible. Shadows stretched over spiraling hallways, wrapping around clouds that floated lazily near the ceilings. Light flickered faintly, echoing off walls that pulsed with a soft, warm glow. Rick paused to observe. "Even the smallest shadows," he whispered, "carry meaning. Every ripple, every bend, every flicker is part of the story." His companion nodded, quiet and thoughtful. They reached a nook where a cluster of shadows pooled like a soft river. Rick knelt and touched the nearest one. It responded immediately, moving like water, flowing into his hand before retreating gently. He laughed softly. "See? They aren't just empty space. They're alive in their own way, and they can teach us things if we're patient. Sometimes, the shadows seem to whisper lessons about courage, not the loud, heroic kind, but the quiet courage of noticing, understanding and acting gently. They reminded Rick and his companion that small actions could ripple across dimensions. That kindness mattered even in places no one else could see, and that subtlety often held more power than force. Rick began to experiment, softly reaching into a shadow, guiding its flow along the edge of a corridor. To his surprise, it twisted and turned in response, forming patterns of light and dark that reflected the hum of nearby portals. His companion gasped softly, eyes wide with wonder. "It's like it's listening to us," they said. Rick nodded. "It is. And if we pay attention, it might even teach us something we didn't know we needed to learn." The corridors themselves seemed to grow quieter in their presence. Portals pulsed gently, clouds floated more slowly, and the multiverse hummed a low, approving tone like a lullaby in the background. Shadows danced in patterns that were both strange and familiar, hinting at worlds and memories too vast for the mind to hold. Yet in their soft complexity, Rick and his companion felt safe, understood, and endlessly curious. Sometimes Rick would trace a shadow with his finger, feeling the cool, almost silky texture. "They're soft," he whispered. "They don't bite, they just wait." And the waiting was the lesson itself, that the universe didn't always need to shout to be heard. That understanding could come in the quiet moments between steps, and that even the tiniest flicker of awareness could be a bridge to something far greater. They came to a small corridor where shadows pooled in gentle arcs over glowing moss. Rick's companion hesitated, then reached out. The shadow curved around their fingers like water, humming softly in a language only felt, not spoken. Rick smiled, feeling a warmth ripple through him. This was the first time he realized how much he could teach without words, and how much he could learn in silence. Even as they moved on, the shadows continued to follow, curling around their feet, draping lightly over floating clouds, lingering near softly pulsing portals. They were guides, companions, and gentle teachers. Rick's companion whispered, "Do they always follow us?" Rick shook his head softly. "Not follow exactly. They're patient. They're here if we notice, and we'll notice if we're ready." That night, Rick and his companion lay on a small floating platform, drifting just above a river of softly glowing light. The shadows leaned in, forming arcs and patterns that reflected the gentle hum of the multiverse. Rick closed his eyes and let himself feel the lessons that had gathered in the quiet corridors: patience, empathy, attentiveness, and the soft power of noticing. Even shadows, it seemed, carried the wisdom of 1,000 worlds, waiting for the right eyes to see and the right hearts to feel. As the lull of the corridors settled around them like a blanket, Rick realized that the multiverse was teaching them something that no explosion or loud adventure could. It was teaching them to move slowly, to notice the invisible, and to trust that the quiet, small gestures they made would carry far more weight than they could imagine. And in that gentle realization, Rick felt a ripple of calm flow through him. The shadows whispered once more, not with fear or urgency, but with gentle acknowledgement. The multiverse was listening, approving, and folding itself softly around him and his companion. They were learning, growing, and stretching in ways that were invisible but infinite, like clouds drifting across a sky that only they could truly see. Somewhere, in the softly glowing corridors and in the gentle sighs of shadows, Rick understood that even the quietest parts of the multiverse had secrets worth discovering. And with his companion by his side, he felt that those secrets could be unraveled gently, patiently, and with love. And so they drifted quietly into the soft lullaby of the multiverse, guided by shadows, whispers, and light, ready for all the small adventures that awaited them in the endless corridors beyond. The night in the multiverse was never ordinary. In one corner, where time wavered like gentle waves, the stars hung low, soft as a sigh. Young Rick and his companion drifted along the edges of a glowing corridor that opened to a sky that seemed infinite, a ceiling of sparkling light stretching across the multiverse. The stars here weren't just distant suns, they were voices, memories, tiny ripples of worlds that might have been or might yet be. Rick leaned back on a floating cloud, feeling the warmth of its soft light against his hands. He listened as the stars hummed faintly, each note a gentle echo that resonated deep within him. His companion lay beside him, quiet, tracing the patterns of light with small, curious fingers. There were no words needed in these moments. Understanding came through presence, through shared breath, through the silent acknowledgement that they were both small sparks within an infinite, unfolding tapestry. The floating clouds beneath them moved lazily, drifting across the expanse of glowing light. Rick reached out, letting his fingers brush against one. It felt cool and soft, alive yet comforting, like the caress of a lullaby that existed only for those who listened closely. He smiled faintly, knowing that the multiverse had a rhythm of its own, a slow, patient rhythm that mirrored the quiet unfolding of hearts and thoughts. As they drifted, Rick's companion spoke softly, almost as if afraid to break the lull of the stars. "Do you think the stars remember us?" Rick considered this, gazing up at the gentle shimmer of countless worlds. "Maybe," he said finally. "Or maybe they just remind us to remember ourselves. Every star is a thought, a ripple, a quiet possibility waiting to be noticed." His companion nodded, eyes wide, letting the words settle. They floated through the starry expanse, moving without urgency, letting the soft currents of air and light guide them. Occasionally a tiny portal would blink into existence, a fleeting doorway to a world of soft, humming echoes. Rick would point these out with a gentle smile, letting his companion approach or pause as they wished. Every portal, every ripple of light, was a story in itself, quiet, patient, waiting for someone curious enough to witness it. Rick thought about the lessons he had learned from shadows and corridors. Now in the open night sky, he realized that these lessons extended across dimensions. Patience, empathy, observation, they were not just tools for navigating corridors. They were ways of being, ways of touching the infinite without disturbing it, ways of noticing without needing to own or control. The multiverse, he understood, was not a puzzle to solve, but a companion to meet softly, step by step. Sometimes the stars themselves seemed to respond to their presence. A cluster would flicker gently, echoing the rhythm of their breathing. A distant comet would trail faint starlight across the sky, moving like a thought drifting lazily through consciousness. Rick reached out, imagining he could touch the hum of each star. And in a way, he could, because noticing it, feeling it, letting it drift into his heart, was its own form of connection, a quiet magic as profound as any portal or adventure. His companion, leaning back on the drifting cloud, murmured, "It feels like we're part of everything." Rick nodded, understanding exactly what they meant. It was the feeling of soft awe, the quiet thrill of being small yet meaningful, a spark within a tapestry that stretched beyond comprehension. He had always been drawn to the corridors, the shadows, the hidden ripples. But here, in the vastness of starry night, he felt the weightless freedom of connection, the kind that needed no action, only attention and only heart. Clouds drifted past, curling and twisting around the edges of floating platforms and softly pulsing portals. They were gentle companions, like invisible hands guiding their attention to small wonders. The shimmer of a distant portal, the hum of a passing ripple, the glow of a star too faint to notice if one hurried. Rick learned to follow these gentle cues, to let curiosity lead without insistence, and to feel a quiet pride in simply observing. The night was slow, unhurried, and it encouraged the same in them. Rick thought about how the multiverse often rushed in other stories, how worlds could collapse or explode in chaos. Here, in this quiet corner, there was no urgency, no fear, only observation, wonder, and soft reflection. Every small act of noticing, every gentle touch of light or shadow became a meditation, a lullaby that carried them deeper into calm awareness. Rick's companion leaned closer, fingers brushing his hand lightly. "Do you think the multiverse dreams?" Rick smiled, letting the warmth of the moment settle in his chest. "Maybe," he said softly. "Or maybe we dream it. Every thought, every ripple we notice becomes part of the whole. We drift through it, but we also leave marks, quiet ones, like footprints in starlight." His companion smiled faintly, eyes reflecting tiny constellations, as if the entire sky had leaned in to listen. They moved slowly, drifting from one softly glowing platform to another, letting the currents of light carry them. Rick noticed the way shadows of clouds stretched across portals, how faint ripples in the starlight seemed to follow their drift, and how the stars, almost imperceptibly, leaned closer, as if observing their quiet exploration. Each movement, each glance, each gentle exhale became part of the rhythm of the night, a lullaby in motion. Rick closed his eyes for a moment, letting the hum of the multiverse fill him. He felt the shadows, the stars, the floating clouds, and his companion, all weaving together into a single, gentle current of understanding. He realized that growth wasn't about grandeur or speed. It was about noticing, listening, and moving softly with the flow of existence. Each ripple, each flicker of light, each drift of cloud became a teacher, a friend, a lullaby for the heart. As the soft, starry night deepened, Rick and his companion lay side by side on a cloud that floated lazily over a river of distant, humming light. The stars above seemed to pulse in gentle rhythm with their hearts. Rick whispered softly, "We're part of the drift, but we also make it ours." His companion nodded, their breath matching the slow exhale of clouds and stars alike. Somewhere beyond the curvature of corridors, the ripple of the multiverse pulsed again, not loudly, not urgently, but gently, like the sigh of a world that was awake and aware of them. Rick stretched his fingers toward the faint light, feeling the subtle hum of connection, of presence, of small wonders shared between friends and across the infinite expanse. And in that quiet, drifting moment, he understood that every soft ripple, every floating thought, every whispered glow of starlight was a story, and that they were part of it, always gently, unhurriedly, and beautifully. And as the night wrapped them in calm, Rick drifted, soft and unafraid, into the lull of infinite stars, carrying with him the first seeds of quiet reflection, understanding, and wonder that would continue to grow across every corridor, every shadow, and every softly glowing portal he would ever encounter. Even in a multiverse filled with endless corridors, shifting portals, and drifting clouds, there were those rare beings who moved differently, not with force, not with urgency, but with the quiet gravity of experience. One evening, as Rick and his companion wandered a corridor that glimmered faintly under soft, pulsating light, they encountered one such being. The mentor appeared at the edge of a gently glowing portal, a tall figure cloaked in warmth and light. Their presence was not startling. It was soft, like a sigh brushing past the edges of awareness. Rick's first thought was curiosity. This figure didn't hum or flicker, didn't bend corridors or ripple stars. It simply existed, and in existing, they seemed to carry the calm authority of someone who had listened to the multiverse for centuries. The mentor's eyes, gentle yet piercing, regarded them with quiet attention. "You are noticing more than most," they said softly. Their voice was like liquid warmth, wrapping around the edges of thought rather than demanding it. Rick's companion instinctively edged closer, while Rick simply nodded. He didn't need to explain. Somehow the mentor already understood what he had been learning: patience, observation, and the quiet, transformative power of noticing. They walked together along corridors that twisted in ways ordinary eyes would never comprehend. The mentor pointed to a softly glowing cloud, drifting lazily overhead. "See it not as a cloud," they whispered, "but as a thought you can follow, a ripple you can learn from. The multiverse teaches not with urgency, but with subtleties, and the subtleties are always there for those willing to notice." Rick followed the cloud, letting it drift through his fingers as it would, and felt the gentle hum of understanding settle into him. The mentor's presence wasn't instructive in the traditional sense. There were no loud lectures, no dramatic demonstrations. Every lesson was threaded quietly into the corridors themselves. The way a shadow bent, the shimmer of a portal, the gentle pulse of starlight. These were the soft signs, and the mentor simply drew attention to them. As they moved, the mentor told stories, not with words of adventure or conquest, but with gentle recollections of quiet moments across the multiverse. Sometimes, they said, the smallest act, helping a drifting shadow, noticing a tiny ripple, offering a kind word to someone who cannot speak, echoes farther than the grandest explosion. Quiet acts are subtle, yes, but they are infinitely powerful. Rick listened, the warmth of the mentor's words threading through him like soft light. His companion leaned closer, fascinated by the calm, steady way the mentor shared their presence. There was no pressure, no rush, only the gentle rhythm of learning by noticing, feeling, and quietly understanding. Each corridor became a classroom, each drifting cloud a teacher, each softly glowing portal a doorway to insight. The mentor led them to a nook where the walls shimmered like liquid silver. Shadows pooled softly in gentle curves, and the air was thick with the faint hum of countless unseen worlds. "Here," the mentor said, "you can learn to listen not just with your ears but with your heart." Every ripple in the multiverse carries knowledge. Every flicker of light, every whispering shadow, every drifting cloud is teaching something. You need only to notice and honor it. Rick knelt, letting the shimmer of the walls brush against his fingers. He felt the subtle pulse of countless hidden worlds, felt the gentle tug of distant stars, and understood in a way words could not convey that learning was not about accumulation. It was about presence, attention, and letting the quiet currents carry him into understanding. His companion followed suit, hands brushing over the soft, glowing moss underfoot. The mentor smiled faintly. "You are noticing," they said. "And that noticing is what allows growth. There is no hurry. There is only the patient unfolding of understanding, one ripple at a time." Rick felt warmth spread through his chest. Here was a truth he had been learning in small pieces, echoed through shadows, clouds and stars, but now given shape and presence by someone who had walked the currents of the multiverse long before him. They paused by a portal that pulsed with the faintest golden light. "Each portal is not just a passage," the mentor said. "It is an invitation to observe, to reflect, to connect. Step through and you will learn something new, not about the portal, not about the world, but about yourself." Rick glanced at his companion, who nodded quietly. Together they stepped lightly into the shimmer, letting the soft ripple carry them forward. Inside, the corridor bent impossibly, clouds floating along walls, shadows dancing across floors, and distant stars pulsing with quiet awareness. Rick noticed, as he had been taught, every small detail. The ripple in the light, the faint hum in the air, the way shadows lingered without crowding. The mentor walked beside them, never rushing, simply letting the lessons unfold, like gentle threads of gold in a vast invisible tapestry. Sometimes, the mentor would pause and speak softly. "Do not confuse subtlety with insignificance. The smallest act of noticing, the softest gesture of care carries more weight than the loudest noise. In quiet observation, you touch the infinite." Rick felt the truth of this settle deep into his chest. Every corridor, every floating cloud, every drifting shadow became a teacher. And he was ready to learn. Even the multiverse seemed to respond to the mentor's presence. Portals shimmered brighter, clouds drifted in more intricate patterns, and shadows leaned gently, almost protectively, over their small trio. Rick realized that guidance did not always require direction. Sometimes the simple presence of someone who had learned to move softly through the infinite currents of the universe was enough to illuminate the path. As evening fell, or whatever passed for evening in corridors, that curved impossibly. The mentor guided them to a softly glowing platform above a river of light that hummed faintly like a lullaby. Rick lay back, letting the gentle pulse of the multiverse flow through him. "You are learning," the mentor said. "And learning is enough. Growth is not loud, not urgent. It is patient, subtle, and infinitely deep." Rick's companion reached out, brushing the soft light of a drifting cloud. "Will we always be learning?" they whispered. The mentor's smile was faint but certain. "Yes," they said. "As long as you notice, as long as you breathe, the multiverse will teach. You are part of it, and it is part of you. That is the rhythm of existence." And so, as the stars pulsed above, shadows leaned close, and clouds drifted lazily in quiet arcs, Rick understood another layer of the multiverse. There was no rush, no clamor, no need to conquer or hurry. There was only presence, attention, empathy, and the gentle, infinite flow of understanding. The mentor had taught them that even in a world of infinite possibilities, quiet guidance, soft knowledge, and patient observation were the greatest powers of all. As they drifted to sleep atop the softly glowing platform, the corridors hummed faintly. The multiverse sighed softly in acknowledgement, and Rick felt for the first time the depth of patient growth. Every ripple, every shadow, every whisper of starlight, every drifting cloud had meaning, and he was learning to read it, slowly, gently, and with care. And somewhere in that gentle understanding, Rick realized that the multiverse itself was a teacher, and the mentor only a guide, pointing softly toward the truths that had always been waiting quietly for him to notice. The corridors of the multiverse often curved in ways that seemed impossible, yet always purposeful. Rick and his companion had learned to navigate them slowly, guided by shadows, clouds, and the quiet hum of portals. But even in a world built on gentle observation and soft lessons, there were challenges. not of danger but of understanding. Misunderstandings could drift between friends. Small fears could ripple like quiet eddies, and even the softest heart could feel uncertain in an infinite landscape. One day, Rick and his companion approached a bridge that arched delicately over a river of glowing light. The bridge itself was not wide or solid, but it shimmered faintly, like a reflection of possibilities rather than a physical path. Crossing it required balance, not just of body but of thought and feeling. Rick hesitated at the edge, noticing the subtle ripples in the light below. "We move slowly here," he said softly, "not because it's dangerous but because the bridge wants us to notice it." His companion looked at him, eyes wide and careful. "Do we have to cross it together?" they asked. Rick nodded, reaching out a hand. "Yes, step with me. Notice the light, the shadows, the hum. That's how we move safely, not with force but with awareness." And together, they began, one careful foot after another, letting the bridge respond to their quiet rhythm. As they crossed, Rick noticed that the bridge was alive in its own way. It swayed gently under their weight, responding to the pull of their attention, the cadence of their breath, and the soft intention behind every step. A shadow drifted along the edge, curving protectively around them. Clouds floated past, brushing their hair and hands, as if reminding them that patience and observation were their allies. A small misunderstanding arose when Rick's companion stumbled over an invisible ripple in the light. I think I might fall," they whispered, voice trembling. Rick stopped, crouching to their level. "It's okay," he said. "The bridge isn't trying to trick you. It's just teaching us to notice, to trust each other, and to move slowly. Step carefully. I'm right here." And with that they continued, each step a gentle lesson in patience, empathy, and quiet courage. They paused midway, leaning over the edge of the bridge, watching the river of light shimmer beneath them. "It feels like the light is alive," his companion murmured. Rick smiled softly. "It is. Everything here has its own pulse. Even bridges have rhythm. Even rivers of light have lessons. You just need to notice them." He reached out, brushing a drifting cloud, letting it swirl around his fingers before continuing. The small act of care, however subtle, seemed to ripple across the bridge, strengthening its gentle sway and steadying their steps. This was their first small challenge that demanded cooperation, quiet reflection, and empathy. It wasn't a trial of strength or courage in the usual sense. There were no monsters or storms, no explosions or dramatic climaxes. The test was internal, learning to trust one another, to notice subtleties and to let the quiet wisdom of the multiverse guide their steps. Each misstep, each pause, each careful breath became a lesson in moving together rather than rushing ahead alone. Rick noticed how his companion began to mirror his calm, careful attention. Their eyes scanned the bridge for subtle ripples in the light. Their hands followed gentle arcs of drifting clouds, and their breathing slowly synchronized with Rick's. Small moments of reassurance, an encouraging glance, a soft smile, a quiet word, strengthened the bridge beneath them, both literally and metaphorically. By the time they reached the far side, neither felt the weight of fear. Instead, they carried a quiet pride, a meditative awe at the simple act of crossing together. Beyond the bridge, the corridors opened into a wide expanse, dotted with softly glowing portals. Rick and his companion paused, letting themselves drift among the scattered lights. Each portal shimmered like a question mark, an invitation to explore, yet also a gentle reminder that sometimes the journey mattered more than the destination. "The bridges we cross," Rick whispered, "are always reflections of the bridges inside us. The steps we take together echo beyond the immediate corridor, beyond the portal, beyond the multiverse itself." His companion nodded thoughtfully, eyes reflecting the soft glow of nearby portals. "So every choice matters, even the quiet ones?" Rick smiled. "Yes. Every step, every glance, every careful breath leaves a ripple. Some are small, some last forever, but they're all part of the rhythm, and the rhythm is what we notice together." As they wandered further, they discovered smaller hidden bridges connecting drifting clouds, arcs of light, and even shadows that moved as if they were paths themselves. Crossing these required attention, patience, and cooperation. Rick guided, his companion learned, and together they felt the subtle pulse of the multiverse underfoot, a soft reassurance that even small acts of mindfulness could carry immense weight. The motif of light, Shadows and bridges began to weave together in their minds. Rick realized that the corridors, clouds, and floating platforms were not merely obstacles or scenery. They were teachers, reflecting back lessons in subtlety, empathy, and trust. Crossing a bridge became a meditation. Following a shadow became an exercise in observation, and sharing a drift across clouds became a quiet acknowledgement of connection. Sometimes, Rick would glance at his companion and notice small acts of courage they hadn't realized they were performing. Steadying themselves on an impossible curve, reaching out to guide a drifting shadow, or pausing to notice a ripple in the light. Each action, small and quiet, became a thread connecting them to the multiverse, to each other, and to the gentle rhythm of growth unfolding inside them. By the time they reached the end of the expanse, the sun, or the closest approximation of one, was rising softly across the corridors, painting the multiverse with gentle hues of orange, pink, and faint violet. The bridges they had crossed glimmered behind them, not as obstacles conquered, but as gentle reminders of patience, understanding, and quiet courage. Shadows and clouds drifted in gentle arcs, softly applauding in their own imperceptible way. Rick leaned back, letting the warmth of the multiverse settle around him. "Bridges are not just for crossing," he said softly. "They're reminders that we move together, notice together, and grow together. Every bridge has its own pulse, and every step we take across it echoes in ways we may never fully understand." His companion smiled faintly, feeling the weight of the lesson settle into their heart. The multiverse itself seemed to hum in gentle approval, an infinite sigh acknowledging their care, their attention, and their soft, patient growth. And in that quiet expanse, drifting among softly glowing portals, Rick realized that the most meaningful adventures were not loud, not urgent, and not dramatic. They were the bridges, the small acts, the shared understanding, and the gentle rhythm that carried them forward together. And as they paused, resting on a drifting cloud above the soft luminescence of the corridors below, Rick understood that bridges were never truly just about where they led. They were reflections of trust, empathy, and attention, ripples that carried forward into the quiet heart of the multiverse, forever expanding, softly, gently, endlessly. Beyond the bridges and softly glowing corridors, Rick and his companion stumbled upon a quiet doorway that seemed almost hidden in the gentle folds of the multiverse. The doorway shimmered faintly, a soft outline of gold and silver light, and beyond it lay a space unlike any they had explored before, a library that seemed to stretch infinitely in every direction. The air was still, calm, almost reverent. The walls glimmered with gentle luminescence, and the shelves were filled not with ordinary books, but with softly glowing tomes, each humming faintly as though holding its own quiet heartbeat. Rick stepped forward slowly, his companion close behind, and felt a ripple of calm pass through him. This was not a place of urgency or challenge. It was a sanctuary for observation, reflection, and quiet understanding. "This is," his companion whispered, eyes wide with awe. "It's endless." Rick nodded, gazing at the shelves that seemed to curve infinitely into soft shadows and gentle light. "It's a library of infinity," he said softly. "Every book, every scroll, every faint glow contains stories, knowledge, and memories from countless worlds. Some are yours, some are mine. Some belong to beings we'll never meet. But all of it is here, waiting to be noticed." The two of them began to wander slowly along the aisles, letting the gentle hum of the library guide their attention. Some books shimmered with colors that felt like emotions, others pulsed softly like stars. Rick reached out to touch a spine, and it hummed in response, opening to reveal a story told not in words, but in soft ripples of light that danced across the air. His companion gasped quietly, letting their fingers hover above another glowing tome. "It's like it's alive," they murmured. Rick smiled. "It is. Everything here remembers. Everything here listens." They discovered corners filled with floating scrolls that drifted lazily like clouds, drifting past softly glowing lanterns suspended in mid-air. Shadows leaned along the shelves, not to frighten, but to guide them, curving protectively around their small forms. Rick realized that this library, like the multiverse itself, required patience. One could not rush through its knowledge. Each ripple, each shimmer demanded attention, reflection, and quiet reverence. As they walked, Rick noticed subtle echoes of earlier adventures, the shimmer of a portal, the flicker of clouds, the soft hum of starlight. Every corridor they had passed, every bridge they had crossed, every shadow they had observed, seemed to be represented here in delicate, glowing form. The library was not just a collection of knowledge. It was a mirror of experience, a reflection of the gentle growth and quiet discovery they had achieved together. At the center of the library, a softly glowing pool of light shimmered like liquid glass. Rick and his companion leaned over the edge, watching as ripples formed when they traced their fingers across the surface. Everything we've learned, every act, every notice, every small kindness, does it go here? His companion asked. Rick nodded thoughtfully. Yes, every ripple we leave, every quiet act, echoes across the multiverse. Some of it reaches here, some stretches into places we'll never see, but it all matters. And this library, it remembers quietly, patiently. They discovered a section filled with floating books that whispered faintly, each one telling stories in a language felt rather than heard. Rick closed his eyes for a moment, letting the stories wash over him. Each whisper carried not just facts but emotions, reflections, and soft truths. He realized that knowledge was not always about understanding the mechanics of a world, but about feeling the pulse of it, sensing the rhythm of its existence, and noticing the small acts that gave it meaning. The companion found a book that shimmered with gentle violet light. As they opened it, a cascade of soft images floated upward, clouds drifting lazily, shadows curving protectively, bridges shimmering with quiet patience. Each image reflected something they had experienced together, every lesson they had learned, every small step across corridors and portals. Rick watched them with quiet pride. This library, he whispered, teaches without telling. It shows, it hums, it whispers. And if we listen, we learn not just about worlds, but about ourselves. They spent hours, or perhaps what felt like hours, though time bent softly here, wandering through the endless aisles. Rick noticed the way his companion's eyes softened as they observed the gentle hum of the library, how their small gestures, touching a floating scroll, leaning closer to a softly glowing book, echoed the quiet curiosity that had guided them through bridges, shadows, and clouds. Together, they discovered that reflection could be as powerful as action, and observation as meaningful as movement. Some books seemed to respond to them, pulsing brighter when they lingered on a section, dimming when they turned away. Rick realized that knowledge here was not static. It was alive, receptive, and deeply empathetic. It responded to care, to attention, and to the gentle presence of those who sought not to take but to notice. Each ripple of light, each faint hum became a lesson in empathy, patience, and quiet understanding. A shadow drifted along the edge of an aisle, curving protectively around Rick and his companion. Rick reached out, letting his hand brush against it, and felt a subtle warmth ripple through him. Even here, he said softly, the multiverse remembers small kindnesses. Every gentle act, every careful observation leaves a trace. That is the rhythm of existence. His companion smiled faintly, tracing a cloud of floating light that shimmered like liquid dreams. As the soft glow of the library pulsed around them, Rick realized that this was more than a place of knowledge. It was a reflection of the journey they had been on, corridors of discovery, shadows that whispered, bridges crossed with patience, clouds that drifted lazily in quiet arcs. Every lesson, every ripple, every moment of quiet observation was preserved here, gently, infinitely. By the time they left the library, stepping softly back into the corridors, Rick felt a deep calm settle over him. The hum of the multiverse, the shadows leaning protectively, the drifting clouds, the softly glowing portals, they all seemed to carry the library's quiet wisdom forward. Each corridor was richer, each shadow more nuanced, each bridge more meaningful. The library had not simply taught them. It had mirrored them, reflecting the patient growth, quiet empathy, and subtle awareness that had carried them this far. And as they floated along, guided by the soft rhythm of the corridors and the gentle pull of portals ahead, Rick realized that the Library of Infinity was not merely a place. It was a living testament to the quiet power of noticing, to the gentle strength of empathy, and to the infinite ripple of small, thoughtful actions. The corridors themselves seemed to hum softly in agreement, as if the multiverse whispered, "You are learning. You are noticing. You are part of this infinite story." And in the lull of that understanding, Rick and his companion let themselves drift quietly, carrying with them the soft glow of the library's lessons, the rhythm of gentle knowledge and the calm, unhurried awareness that even the smallest ripple could echo through infinity. After leaving the Library of Infinity, Rick and his companion drifted through corridors, illuminated not by sunlight or portal glow, but by small hovering lights that seemed alive. Each orb pulsed softly, like a heartbeat suspended in mid-air. They didn't cast harsh shadows or demand attention. They simply existed, glowing gently and inviting reflection. Rick found himself drawn to them, noticing the subtle changes in hue, the rhythm of their pulses and the quiet whispers of insight that seemed to linger around their edges. "Do they talk?" his companion asked softly, eyes wide as they reached toward one particularly warm light. Rick smiled faintly. "Not with words, but they speak in other ways. In rhythm, in warmth, in quiet nudges toward noticing. Sometimes you understand more when they don't speak at all." The companion nodded slowly, letting the gentle glow wrap around their awareness like a comforting blanket. They moved among the lights, observing how some pulsed faster as they approached. Others dimmed slightly before brightening again. Rick noticed patterns, like tiny conversations hidden in the multiverse's quiet corners. It reminded him of the lessons from shadows and clouds, that presence, attention and patience revealed truths far beyond what could be grasped with hurried thought. As they drifted, Rick found himself reflecting on the moments with his mentor, the careful crossing of bridges, and the quiet hum of the library. Each glowing light seemed to echo these lessons. One orb pulsed warmly, and he realized it reminded him of a particular moment when his companion had paused on a bridge, hesitating yet trusting, and they had crossed together. Another shimmered faintly blue, reflecting a memory of gentle shadows guiding them through an endless corridor. Each glow carried a story, each pulse a memory, each warmth a quiet affirmation. Rick reached toward a light, letting his fingers brush its soft surface. It responded immediately, brightening slightly, then dimming in a slow rhythm. "It's teaching me," he whispered, feeling a warmth ripple through his chest. "Not about the multiverse, but about myself, about how I move through it." His companion leaned close, fingertips hovering over a neighboring orb. "I think it's showing me the same," they murmured. "That small choices matter, that noticing matters, that even quiet actions can have weight." They walked through corridors where lights clustered in arcs and spirals, floating above glowing platforms and weaving between drifting clouds. Shadows bent gently around them, guiding their passage, and the soft hum of distant portals created a background rhythm that was almost musical. Rick and his companion didn't speak much. They didn't need to. The lights, the shadows, the drifting clouds, and the rhythm of the corridors were enough to carry them through understanding, reflection and shared awareness. Sometimes, the lights pulsed in tandem with their breathing, responding to their calm attention. Rick realized that connection was not always about words or action. Sometimes it was about presence, about attuning oneself to the subtle rhythms of the world, and allowing the universe to guide you in ways too delicate to be spoken aloud. His companion glanced at him, eyes reflecting the soft glow of a particularly bright orb. "It feels like we're part of something bigger, but it's not overwhelming," they whispered. Rick nodded. "Exactly. The multiverse isn't just around us. It's also in us. Every ripple we notice, every soft choice we make, becomes part of the story." They paused before a particularly radiant light, larger than the others, hovering just above the corridor's edge. Rick felt the hum of countless quiet memories emanating from it. "This one," he said softly, "feels like it knows everything we've been through. All the bridges, shadows, clouds, and libraries. All the lessons we've learned and all the ones we haven't." His companion reached out, letting the glow wash over their hands. "It feels like it's listening," Rick smiled faintly. "It is. And when you notice, really notice, it responds. That's how understanding grows." The companion watched as the light pulsed gently in response to Rick's hand, a quiet rhythm that mirrored his heartbeat. Rick reflected on the mentor's lessons, subtlety, empathy, attention. All of it now seemed present in this single glowing orb. It was a reminder that emotional understanding did not require force, noise, or grandeur. It required soft listening, presence, and gentle reflection. They continued along the corridor, passing clusters of lights that flickered softly like tiny stars. Some of the lights formed arcs, others hovered near drifting clouds, and shadows leaned protectively along the walls. Each light seemed to invite conversation, not in words but in subtle awareness. Rick realized that these glowing entities were more than decorative. They were teachers of patience, empathy, and observation. Each pulse was a lesson, each glow an affirmation, each warmth a subtle nudge toward understanding. Rick turned to his companion, noticing how their eyes lingered on the lights, how their fingers occasionally brushed against drifting clouds, how their breathing had slowed into a quiet, meditative rhythm. "Do you feel it?" he whispered. "The rhythm of the multiverse. It's not loud. It's not urgent. It's patient. It's teaching us." His companion nodded, letting the glow of a small light reflect in their eyes. "Yes, and it's showing me that even small gestures, kind words, careful choices, noticing quietly, carry weight, even if we don't see it immediately." As they moved deeper into the corridor, the lights began to cluster into shapes, forming arcs that reminded Rick of bridges, spirals that mirrored drifting clouds, and subtle patterns like shadows he had once followed. It was as if the multiverse itself had arranged them into a soft reflection of their journey so far. Rick reached out, letting his hand brush an arc of light. It pulsed immediately, responding to the gentle touch and acknowledging the quiet journey that had brought them here. For hours, or what seemed like hours in a space where time drifted and bent, they wandered among the glowing lights, learning without instruction, reflecting without pressure, and noticing without haste. The corridor became a meditation. The lights became guides, and the shadows, clouds, and faint hum of portals wove together into a lullaby of understanding. Every gentle pulse of light was a reminder that growth could be quiet, subtle, and infinitely profound. Finally, Rick paused, leaning against a softly glowing wall. "We're learning not just to move through the multiverse," he said softly. "We're learning to move through life, with care, awareness, and gentle attention. That's the true lesson. The lights aren't just glowing, they're reflecting us. And in noticing them, we notice ourselves." His companion smiled faintly, letting their hand hover over a final orb. "It's beautiful," they whispered. "And calming." Rick nodded, letting the corridor hum around them, letting the lights pulse softly in response. In that quiet glow, with shadows leaning gently and clouds drifting lazily nearby, they felt the rhythm of understanding settle into them. The multiverse had spoken, not in words, not in force, but in glow, rhythm, and presence. Rick realized that every act of empathy, every moment of noticing, every soft conversation, whether with a being, a shadow, a cloud, or a glowing light, was a ripple that mattered. And in the stillness of the corridor, surrounded by softly pulsing lights, he knew that the quietest lessons were often the deepest, the most transformative, and the most infinite. And so, as they drifted along the corridor, enveloped in the gentle glow of light, the soft whispers of shadows, and the calm rhythm of floating clouds, Rick and his companion understood that some conversations didn't require words at all. Some lessons were felt in pulses of warmth, reflected in soft lights, and carried in the quiet awareness of shared presence. And in that understanding, they let themselves drift, carried by the gentle current of infinite glowing understanding. Even in the quiet corners of the multiverse, storms found their way in, not the violent, chaotic kind that shattered worlds, but subtle, reflective tempests that drifted like clouds heavy with thought and emotion. Rick and his companion had wandered through endless corridors of light and shadow, crossed bridges of understanding, and followed glowing lights that hummed softly with quiet lessons. Yet today the air carried a different tone, a soft heaviness that pressed gently but insistently against their hearts. Heaviness that pressed gently but insistently against their hearts. They found themselves at the edge of a floating platform overlooking a river of pale, liquid starlight. Clouds hung low and motionless, their edges darkened by faint hints of sorrow. The usual hum of corridors was muted, as if the multiverse itself had leaned back and sighed. Rick noticed the subtle shift in his companion's breathing, the small pause, the way their shoulders hunched slightly, the shadow of unease flickering across their eyes. "It feels different," his companion whispered. "Like something is missing." Rick nodded, tracing a finger along the soft glow of the river below. "It is different," he said gently. And that's okay. Storms come quietly sometimes, not to harm us, but to remind us to pause, to reflect, and to notice the ripples we carry inside ourselves. A gentle rain began to fall, soft droplets of light that rippled across the surface of the starlit river. It wasn't wet or cold, only perceptible in the shimmer it left behind. Rick and his companion stood together, letting the soft glow of each drop wash over them, reflecting back memories of corridors they had wandered, bridges they had crossed, shadows they had followed, and lights they had observed. The gentle storm was less an obstacle and more a companion guiding them inward. Rick thought about the lessons learned from the mentor, the bridges, the library, and the glowing lights. Sometimes, he said softly, storms arrive not to scare but to teach. Every drop, every whisper, every shadow in the rain is part of a pattern. If we notice, if we pause, we can find rhythm even in the clouds. His companion leaned closer, hands brushing his. Even when it feels heavy? Rick nodded. Especially then. That's when noticing matters most. The storm intensified slightly, enough to create faint ripples across the river of light, yet never violently. Rick and his companion began to walk along the edge, careful with each step, letting the puddles of soft luminescence guide them. Every droplet reflected not just the sky, but echoes of past lessons, shadows of bridges crossed with care, clouds drifted through slowly, or glowing lights observed with mindful attention. The storm became a gentle mirror of their growth, reminding them that even discomfort could hold beauty. As they wandered, they encountered a shadow that had lost its shape in the rain, bending irregularly with each gentle gust. Rick reached out, letting his fingers brush along its edges. The shadow trembled slightly, then settled into a softer, more coherent form. Even shadows sometimes need comfort, he murmured. Storms can shake them just as they shake us. But care, attention, and patience always help them, or us, find form again. His companion watched, eyes soft, as Rick guided the shadow into its natural flow along the corridor. It feels like healing, they whispered. Not just for it, but for us too. Rick smiled faintly. Yes, storms aren't just reminders of what's outside. They remind us of what's inside, our patience, our empathy, our ability to notice, comfort, and grow. A faint wind drifted through the corridors, lifting strands of cloud and soft debris, carrying whispers from distant corners. The multiverse seemed to hum quietly, acknowledging their presence and their calm attention amidst the gentle storm. Rick realized that even the smallest acts, supporting a trembling shadow, noticing the subtle pulse of the rain, holding a hand steady for a companion, were echoes that resonated far beyond immediate perception. Each ripple carried quiet heroism, the kind that left no grand mark, yet shaped everything softly around it. The storm continued to drift alongside them, moving at its own pace, encouraging reflection without demand. Rick paused, letting his companion lean against his shoulder. Some storms, he said, are gentle because they want us to notice ourselves. Not just what we see, but how we feel. Not just where we go, but how we carry each other. His companion closed their eyes, letting the soft hum of falling light wash over their chest, absorbing the quiet wisdom in the rhythm of droplets. As the rain lightened, turning into soft sparkles drifting lazily like dust motes, Rick and his companion came to a bridge suspended above a pool of liquid stars. The bridge trembled slightly under the residual ripples of the storm, but this time they crossed without hesitation. They moved slowly, deliberately, noticing every pulse, every shimmer, every quiver of the bridge. Each step reaffirmed what they had learned. Patience, empathy, observation, and gentle courage were all that was needed to navigate not just corridors and bridges, but the inner landscape stirred by the storm. They reached the other side and paused, looking back at the corridor behind them. The storm had passed, leaving the faintest trails of luminescent droplets across the clouds and platforms. Rick realized that storms never truly ended. They lingered as memories, as echoes, as opportunities to reflect. Some were gentle, like this one. Some might feel heavier later, but each carried lessons in resilience, empathy, and quiet awareness. Rick's companion turned toward him, eyes reflecting the faint glow of post-storm corridors. I understand, they said softly. Even fear, sadness, or discomfort, they're not enemies. They're teachers. Rick nodded, letting the soft light of the corridor wash over them both. Exactly. Storms remind us of our ability to notice, to care, and to move gently forward. And sometimes that's enough. They rested atop a drifting cloud, letting the residual shimmer of rain droplets fall across them like tiny reminders of the lessons learned. Rick closed his eyes, feeling the calm of the multiverse settling around him, the warmth of presence and the quiet rhythm of patience, observation, and empathy. The storm had arrived, taught its lesson, and passed, not as a force to overcome, but as a gentle companion encouraging reflection, growth and connection. And in that moment, as clouds drifted slowly across softly glowing platforms, shadows leaned protectively along corridor edges, and faint portals hummed in rhythm with their breathing. Rick understood that resilience was not always loud. It did not need fireworks or dramatic triumphs. It existed in quiet patience, gentle understanding, and the soft courage to move forward, even under a gentle storm. The multiverse whispered softly in acknowledgement, as if saying, even the smallest act of care, the gentlest response to a ripple of discomfort, echoes infinitely. And you are learning, noticing, and moving softly through it all. And so, as they drifted on, the storm finally dissipated into faint glimmers, leaving behind calm corridors, shimmering clouds, and the quiet knowledge that even in discomfort, growth could be gentle, subtle, and infinitely profound. The corridors of the multiverse carried not only light, shadows, and clouds, but also the soft echoes of countless moments stretching across infinite timelines. Rick and his companion had learned to move gently through space, but today they were beginning to notice time itself as a living, breathing entity, subtle, quiet, and endlessly patient. As they wandered, the corridors seemed to pulse with faint memories, each ripple a whisper of choices made, paths taken, or moments almost missed. The walls shimmered softly, reflecting not only light but faint echoes of earlier corridors they had crossed. The bridges, the glowing libraries, the gentle storms. Rick paused, running a hand along the luminous surface of a drifting platform, and felt the pulse of the multiverse beneath his fingers. Time isn't just a line, he whispered. It's a rhythm. Some choices ripple like clouds, some linger like stars. His companion tilted their head, eyes wide and reflective. So every little moment matters. Rick smiled softly. Yes, every glance, every pause, every quiet act. It all resonates, even in ways we may never see. That's the beauty of noticing. They reached a section of corridors where faint golden threads of light traced looping arcs along walls, floors, and drifting clouds. Rick noticed that these threads seemed to respond to their steps and breaths, bending gently with their attention. These are echoes, he murmured. The multiverse remembering. Every step we've taken, every small choice leaves a trace. Some are bright, some barely visible, but all are here. His companion reached out to touch one of the glowing threads. It hummed faintly, vibrating in sync with the rhythm of their heartbeat. It feels alive, they said softly. Rick nodded. It is. Time here isn't just something that passes. It listens. It responds. It carries the weight of every ripple we create. They continued slowly, observing threads of gold weaving through soft shadows, drifting clouds and glowing portals. Some threads curved back on themselves, forming subtle loops that hinted at past choices returning, influencing moments they hadn't yet encountered. Rick realized that these whispers of time were not warnings or lessons. They were invitations to reflect, to notice, and to understand the quiet, infinite ways their actions mattered. At one point, they paused before a gently glowing pool, where reflections of distant corridors shimmered like soft liquid mirrors. Rick saw fragments of their earlier adventures, crossing bridges with care, exploring the library of infinity, learning from glowing lights, and weathering the gentle storm. Time doesn't erase, he said quietly. It folds, it loops, and it whispers reminders of what we've learned, guiding us softly like a lullaby. His companion knelt beside him, fingers brushing the surface of the pool. So even choices I thought were small, they echo too. Rick nodded, letting his own fingers trace the faint ripples. Every ripple counts, even when it seems invisible, even when we forget it. Some echoes linger quietly, shaping the rhythm of all that follows. As they moved along, the corridors seemed to stretch and contract, subtly bending around threads of memory and light. Shadows leaned protectively, clouds drifted slowly, and portals pulsed in faint acknowledgement of their presence. Rick noticed how comfortable his companion had become with the rhythm of noticing. the way their gaze lingered on subtle threads, the careful attention to light and shadow, the soft alignment of their steps with the flow of time. They passed a faintly glowing corridor lined with suspended orbs, each one containing a flickering memory. One orb displayed the moment they had first crossed a bridge together, another showed a drifting cloud from the gentle storm, and a third reflected the quiet moments spent in the library of infinity. "It's like reliving everything, but softer," his companion whispered. "Not like memories we remember, but like gentle reminders." Rick smiled, watching the soft flicker of light. "Exactly. Time here isn't a burden, it's a companion. It whispers, it hums, it offers us a chance to notice, reflect, and grow. Every ripple we create echoes in ways we might never see, but they are always there, quietly shaping who we become." They continued walking, letting the golden threads of time guide them along drifting platforms. Some threads formed loops that mirrored choices they had made and forgotten. Others shimmered faintly with possibilities not yet realized. Rick realized that understanding time this way, listening to its whispers, noticing its soft echoes, was as much an act of empathy as it was of observation. Each ripple, each fold, each loop carried not just information but emotional resonance. A faint wind drifted through the corridor, lifting soft clouds and creating subtle ripples in the threads of light. Rick paused, taking a deep breath, and felt the hum of countless choices, small acts and quiet lessons vibrating through the multiverse. "Some people think time is strict and linear," he said softly, "but here we see its patience, its rhythm, its ability to fold and echo and whisper quietly, and we can learn from it just by noticing." His companion rested against his shoulder, letting the soft golden light reflect across their eyes. "It feels comforting," they murmured, "knowing that even mistakes, small fears, or quiet doubts, they don't disappear. They're part of the rhythm, part of the story." Rick nodded. "Yes, and that's why noticing matters. Every choice, every gentle act, every small kindness, none of it is lost. It all carries forward softly, infinitely." As they moved deeper into the corridor, the threads of time began to cluster into intricate patterns, loops, spirals, and arcs that seemed almost musical. Rick realized that the multiverse was teaching them again, not by urgency or force, but by quiet demonstration. Watching, noticing, reflecting, and understanding were the true ways to move with the flow of existence. They paused before a gently glowing archway, its surface shimmering with faint echoes of all they had experienced. Rick reached out, letting his hand brush the pulse of light, and felt a soft resonance of warmth, memory, and quiet understanding. "Every moment, every ripple, every thread, everything we've noticed leads us here," he whispered. His companion's hand touched his, and they stood together in quiet reflection, letting the infinite rhythm of time settle around them. The corridor hummed softly in response, threads of light and echoes of memories stretching outward in gentle arcs. Rick realized that some lessons of the multiverse were not meant to be spoken aloud. They were to be felt, observed, and absorbed in quiet attention. And in this moment, with shadows curving protectively and clouds drifting lazily overhead, he understood that growth, empathy, and reflection were woven into the very fabric of time itself. And as they drifted forward, carried by the soft rhythm of threads, light, and memory, Rick felt a gentle wonder settle over him. Some choices ripple, some linger, and some whisper softly, guiding every step, every pause, and every act of quiet care. And in listening to those whispers, he and his companion felt a deep, meditative connection, not only to each other but to the endless, serene flow of the multiverse itself. The multiverse, vast and shimmering, was often mistaken as a place for grand gestures, colossal discoveries, epic collisions, or dramatic revelations. But Rick had begun to understand a quieter truth. The most meaningful ripples were not always forged in noise or spectacle. They were born in small, deliberate acts, almost imperceptible, yet echoing endlessly through the threads of existence. Rick and his companion drifted along a corridor suspended above a river of soft, glowing mist. Shadows curved gently along the edges, and clouds floated slowly through arches of faint light. They had left the whispers of time behind, carrying its lessons subtly in their awareness. Now their focus was on noticing the subtle currents around them, the small needs of passing beings, the tremor of an unstable bridge, the faint dimming of a portal's glow. "This corridor, it feels alive," his companion whispered. Like it's waiting for us to do something gentle, small, but meaningful. Rick nodded, letting his fingers trail over a drifting cloud. Exactly. Some acts seem insignificant. Picking up a stray thread of light, smoothing a flickering shadow, sharing warmth with a lost soul. But every ripple matters. That's how quiet heroism works. A faint hum rose from a distant platform. Rick followed it with his companion, finding a small creature struggling to float between drifting clouds. Its wings flickered uncertainly, unable to sustain lift. Rick knelt and extended a hand. The creature hesitated, then landed softly on his palm. His companion mirrored his motion, letting their own gentle presence guide the creature toward a stable current. Even small help matters, Rick murmured. It's not about glory. It's about noticing, responding, and letting the universe carry the ripple forward. They continued, encountering more subtle challenges. A portal flickering with unstable light, a cloud tilting dangerously above a drifting platform, a shadow curled too tightly around a corner, suffocating the glow beneath it. Each time Rick and his companion paused, reflected and acted with care. The portal stabilized with a soft touch, the cloud tilted back into balance with gentle attention, and the shadow unfurled when they whispered softly into its folds. Every act, though small, produced an immediate sense of harmony and a lingering echo in the corridors. Rick watched his companion closely, noting how their confidence grew not from boldness, but from mindful care. See how it changes when you notice? He asked softly. Every gentle gesture spreads even beyond our perception. The multiverse is a web of small ripples. Some are obvious, some invisible, but all contribute. They reached a platform where faint golden lights hovered near a drifting puddle of liquid starlight. A being, lost and trembling, floated nearby, unsure of its path. Rick approached slowly, offering a soft hand. You can guide it, he said to his companion, but quietly. Let it feel your care, not your urgency. They leaned closer, hands hovering just above the being. Gradually it began to respond, moving with their rhythm rather than against it. The lights around them pulsed gently, echoing the subtle harmony of care in motion. Rick realized that this was the essence of quiet heroism, noticing not only danger or need, but the softest currents of life, moving with them rather than against them, and trusting that small, deliberate acts could create infinite echoes. The multiverse responded softly to mindfulness, empathy, and gentle courage. Every corridor, cloud, shadow, and drifting platform carried traces of their subtle interventions, glowing faintly in acknowledgement. As they walked along the corridor, Rick noticed small forms of gratitude emerging in the creatures, clouds, and shadows around them. Some beings tilted slightly toward the light, clouds drifted more steadily, shadows curved protectively, and drifting platforms stabilized under their touch. Each ripple reinforced the lessons of bridges, glowing lights, storms, and whispers of time that careful attention, empathy, and patience were the threads from which the most meaningful growth could be woven. Rick paused near a cluster of softly glowing orbs hovering above a small puddle. Each orb reflected one of their earlier acts, stabilizing a portal, helping a trembling creature, uncurving a shadow. Look at this, he whispered to his companion. Every small ripple, every gentle action, it's all here. Not for show, not for recognition, but to remind us of the quiet strength we carry. His companion nodded, feeling the warmth of acknowledgement in the faint pulse of light. They reached a particularly unstable bridge, faint cracks forming in the glowing platform beneath them. Rick knelt, brushing his hands across the surface. The cracks shimmered briefly, then began to smooth, responding to his attention. Even here, he murmured, small care stabilizes the path. It doesn't erase difficulty or challenge. It just shifts it toward harmony. That's the quiet ripple of action. His companion crouched beside him, fingers hovering over a faintly quivering cloud. It's amazing, they whispered, that the tiniest gestures can matter so much. Rick smiled, watching the cloud settle gently. Yes, the multiverse remembers. And so do we. Every act of kindness, every thoughtful pause, every careful notice, we carry it forward, and it resonates in ways we may never fully see. As they continued, the corridors became a symphony of small ripples. Glowing clouds adjusted softly under their steps. Shadows leaned protectively around drifting lights. Portals hummed with gentle stability, and creatures moved with newfound confidence. Rick realized that heroism did not need grandeur. The true measure of influence was subtle, quiet, and infinitely patient. Each act of care, no matter how small, contributed to a living pattern, weaving them into the ongoing rhythm of the multiverse. Finally, they paused atop a drifting cloud, overlooking a river of soft luminescence. The corridor stretched endlessly before them, filled with shadows, glowing lights, and drifting clouds, all resonating faintly with the echoes of their small, deliberate acts. Rick leaned back, letting the calm rhythm settle over him, reflecting on the journey so far. "Every ripple counts," he whispered. "Every quiet act carries weight, far beyond what we can see. And that's enough." "That's always enough." His companion smiled faintly, watching the corridors shimmer in response to their passage. "I think I understand now," they murmured. "It's not about being grand. It's about being present, noticing and acting with care. That's what truly matters." Rick nodded, feeling the hum of the multiverse affirming their insight. "Yes, and every ripple spreads. Not just in corridors or clouds, but in hearts, shadows, and light. Every quiet gesture, every gentle action, leaves an echo." And so as they drifted along, carried by the gentle flow of corridors, shadows, clouds, and portals, Rick and his companion felt the quiet strength of small acts ripple infinitely. They understood that heroism could be soft, patience could be powerful, and mindfulness could shape infinite worlds. And in that understanding, they let themselves rest into the rhythm of the multiverse, carried gently by the echo of every thoughtful, careful, and kind gesture they had made. The corridors of the multiverse often seemed to breathe alongside those who wandered them. Today a gentle weight hung in the air, a mist of uncertainty, not violent or threatening, but soft, drifting and subtle. Rick and his companion had moved through glowing threads, pulsing lights and drifting clouds, yet now a quiet tension lingered, as though the multiverse itself had drawn a curtain of reflection across their hearts. "Do you feel it?" his companion whispered, tracing a finger along a faintly shimmering cloud. "It's heavier." Rick nodded slowly, letting his gaze drift along the corridor. "Yes, clouds sometimes hover over hearts too, not just the sky. They remind us of feelings we haven't yet understood, or moments we haven't fully processed." The soft mist swirled around them, catching faint light from drifting orbs. Shadows curved gently along the edges of the corridor, protective but distant, as if allowing space for reflection. Rick and his companion walked slowly, letting the weight settle without resistance. There was no urgency here, only awareness, the quiet rhythm of emotions moving softly, much like clouds drifting across an unseen sky. They reached a platform where a cluster of small beings lingered, their forms faintly illuminated and trembling with uncertainty. Rick knelt, letting his hand hover just above them, careful not to disturb their fragile balance. "Sometimes," he murmured, "we carry burdens that aren't ours alone. We feel the clouds of others' hearts as well. And sometimes the only thing that helps is quiet presence." His companion mirrored his gesture, extending a soft hand to the nearest figure. A faint ripple passed through the clouds overhead, brushing softly against the floating lights and shadows. Rick realized that these clouds were not obstacles but mirrors. They reflected the small unspoken tensions, misunderstandings, and unresolved emotions between him and his companion. "Do you remember the moment on the unstable bridge?" he asked softly. "We didn't say much, but there was a pause, a misstep in understanding. That pause. It left a small shadow here." His companion nodded, eyes soft. "I felt it too. I didn't know how to fix it at the time." Rick smiled gently. "Neither did I, and that's okay. Clouds aren't here to punish us. They're here to help us notice, reflect, and move gently forward." The mist seemed to respond, shifting slightly as if in acknowledgement, forming soft arcs and gentle spirals that mirrored their reflections. They wandered further, guided by faint threads of light, shadows leaning protectively, and drifting clouds that mirrored the rhythm of their hearts. Every step became a meditation, every pause a gentle acknowledgement of the tensions that lingered. Rick realized that emotional challenges were not unlike the soft currents of the multiverse, subtle, pervasive, and infinitely patient. One did not need to rush them or force resolution. Observation, empathy, and gentle care were enough. A drifting orb pulsed faintly near a cloud that seemed heavier than the others. Rick reached out, letting his fingers brush the mist. It rippled softly, and he felt the quiet tension of past misunderstandings begin to dissolve. "Sometimes," he whispered, "reconciliation doesn't come from words. It comes from presence, attention, and the willingness to notice the small ripples between us." His companion placed a hand atop his, feeling the warmth and reassurance radiating from the gesture. They paused before a faintly glowing bridge, suspended over a river of liquid starlight. Clouds drifted above, heavy with reflection, casting gentle shadows on the surface. "We need to cross," Rick said softly. "But first, let's let the clouds settle just a little. Not rush, not force, just allow." His companion nodded, eyes reflecting the soft glow. Together they took slow, deliberate steps, feeling the rhythm of the bridge beneath them, the gentle sway of clouds above, and the subtle pulse of light guiding them forward. As they reached the center of the bridge, the mist above began to thin, revealing faint stars twinkling softly in the distance. Shadows leaned protectively along the edges of the bridge, and drifting clouds flowed in gentle arcs, creating a sense of quiet harmony. Rick turned to his companion. "See? Clouds move. Hearts move. Tension doesn't last forever, and sometimes the softest actions, listening, pausing, noticing, are enough to allow harmony to return." His companion smiled faintly, letting the soft glow reflect in their eyes. "I feel it," slowly dissolving. "Not gone, just lighter, and that's okay?" Rick nodded. "Exactly. Not every challenge disappears instantly. Some linger as gentle reminders. And that's the rhythm of growth, slow, patient, and infinitely forgiving." They continued along the corridor, noticing the subtle ripples in clouds overhead, shadows curving protectively around drifting lights, and small beings moving with newfound calm. Each movement, each quiet gesture, each reflective pause reinforced the lessons of empathy, patience, and gentle care. Even minor reconciliations, small acknowledgements, and soft presence produced echoes that stretched far beyond immediate perception. Rick paused near a drifting cloud, brushing his hand along its surface. The cloud shimmered, releasing faint light that echoed across the corridor. "Every small act of reflection, every gentle attempt to understand produces a ripple," he said softly. "Some are visible immediately, some take time, but all carry weight in ways we may never fully see." His companion leaned close, fingers brushing his. I understand. The clouds, the tension, they're part of the rhythm. Not obstacles, but guides." The multiverse around them pulsed softly, as if affirming their understanding. Shadows, clouds, and drifting platforms seemed to harmonize in response, creating a gentle lullaby of awareness, reflection, and quiet reconciliation. Rick realized that emotional tension, like the soft currents of the multiverse, required only attention, care, and patience to shift into harmony. As they moved forward, the corridors became a meditation in motion. The lingering clouds over their hearts thinned gradually, drifting lazily across platforms and shadows, revealing the gentle glow of distant stars, softly pulsing orbs, and floating threads of light. Rick understood that relationships, like corridors, clouds, and bridges, required the same patient attention, notice, care, presence, and quiet empathy. Finally, they paused atop a drifting cloud, looking back over the corridor behind them. The mist had softened. The clouds had parted slightly and shadows leaned gently along the edges. "Harmony isn't about perfection," Rick said softly. "It's about noticing, responding, and letting small ripples do their work. Clouds may return, but now we know how to move with them." His companion smiled faintly, eyes reflecting the soft glow of drifting lights. And in that shared stillness, as the multiverse hummed softly around them, Rick and his companion allowed themselves to rest. The clouds over their hearts had lifted just enough to feel light. The gentle rhythms of attention and empathy echoed softly in their awareness, and the corridors stretched infinitely ahead, filled with shadows, clouds, and light, carrying the lessons of quiet reconciliation. Rick and his companion drifted along a corridor that shimmered with faint, liquid light. The glow pulsed softly beneath their feet, reflecting drifting clouds and hovering shadows that leaned protectively along the edges. Today, however, the multiverse seemed to hum differently, a gentle vibration that suggested discovery, not urgency. Something waited ahead, subtle yet compelling, like a whisper that promised insight. At the corridor's end they found it, a map unlike any Rick had ever seen. It wasn't printed or drawn, nor contained within pages. Instead, it floated in the air, an intricate lattice of glowing threads pulsing softly with possibilities. Each thread represented a hidden world, a quiet corner of the multiverse, shimmering with gentle potential. Rick reached out, letting his fingers hover above a golden line that curved delicately around a drifting cloud. The thread pulsed faintly, and he felt a warmth ripple through him. "This map," his companion whispered, eyes wide. "It's alive," Rick nodded. "It's not just a guide. It's a reflection. Each hidden world carries lessons, echoes, and small ripples we can interact with. It shows paths, but it doesn't demand which we take. It invites noticing." As they moved closer, threads of light shifted subtly, rearranging themselves into new arcs, spirals, and bridges. Shadows leaned closer, curving along the luminous paths, and drifting clouds traced gentle loops overhead. The map pulsed rhythmically, as if breathing. Rick realized that the map mirrored their growth. Each choice they had made, each small act of kindness, each moment of reflection, had contributed to the soft illumination of its threads. Rick extended his hand toward a thread, leading to a faintly glowing platform. "Every world here," he murmured, "represents something we might explore. Not just to see, but to understand. Some will teach patience, some empathy, some resilience, and some will simply remind us of the quiet beauty in noticing." His companion leaned closer, tracing a spiraling thread with a fingertip. "It's like the map is showing us what we've already carried within ourselves, and the places we haven't yet discovered are reflected softly, not forcefully." They wandered along a floating platform, letting the map guide their awareness. Small beings drifted nearby, moving along gentle currents, occasionally pausing to observe the shimmering threads. Rick noticed how even minor interactions caused subtle pulses in the map. A glance, a kind word, a steadying hand. Each small act created a ripple that radiated across hidden worlds, reinforcing lessons of patience, empathy, and mindful presence. Rick paused before a glowing thread that bent downward into a misty chasm. "This one feels like reflection," he whispered. "It's not about traveling far, but about observing carefully. Some paths are meant to remind us of inner landscapes, not just external ones." His companion nodded, eyes tracing the thread as it shimmered. "It's like learning that the hidden worlds aren't just out there. They're also within us. Every ripple we notice, every subtle act, illuminates not just the multiverse, but our hearts." They moved along threads that formed gentle arcs, passing softly pulsing orbs and drifting. Clouds that reflected faint shadows of corridors they had already explored. Every path carried subtle lessons, a shadow reminding them of quiet understanding, a cloud echoing the rhythm of emotional reflection, a glowing orb illuminating the importance of mindful attention. Rick realized that the map was not static. It responded to awareness, shifting subtly as they paused, observed, and allowed insight to ripple through their consciousness. A small golden orb hovered above a thread, leading to a hidden world suspended in mist. Rick reached out, brushing its surface gently. The orb pulsed immediately, sending faint ripples across neighboring threads. "See that?" he asked softly. Even small attention, quiet reflection, produces echoes. The multiverse listens, mirrors, and responds in ways that are subtle but meaningful. Every world, every ripple, every path is interconnected. His companion leaned close, fingertips hovering above another thread. "It feels like possibilities," they murmured. "Not choices we must make, but gentle invitations. And noticing them is its own lesson." Rick smiled faintly. "Exactly. The map doesn't push or demand. It asks us to be present, observe, and allow quiet understanding to guide our steps." They continued exploring, following threads that curved delicately above floating clouds and across softly glowing corridors. Shadows leaned protectively, and faint light shimmered beneath their feet, highlighting arcs and spirals of potential paths. Every movement through the map created subtle vibrations, faint pulses of acknowledgement from hidden worlds that whispered, without urgency, of lessons and gentle guidance. Rick realized that some paths on the map reflected worlds they had already influenced through small acts, stabilizing clouds, guiding trembling beings, repairing subtle tears in floating corridors, and offering quiet presence to shadows and light. Other paths shimmered faintly with undiscovered possibilities, inviting observation and reflection. Every world matters, he said softly, even the ones we may never step into. Every ripple, every act, every thoughtful pause contributes to the harmony of everything around us. His companion nodded, tracing a loop that reflected the gentle storm they had encountered days, or perhaps timeless moments before. It's like even moments of discomfort have their place, they murmured. Even sadness, uncertainty, or fear, they leave ripples that shape the multiverse quietly. Rick's eyes softened. Yes, and noticing those ripples, honoring them, learning from them, that's how understanding grows. As they moved along the map, the multiverse around them pulsed in response. Clouds drifted lazily across softly glowing platforms. Shadows leaned protectively around threads, and drifting orbs hummed faintly with resonance. Rick realized that the hidden worlds weren't just physical spaces. They were reflections of attention, empathy, patience, and gentle action. Every act, every choice, every quiet observation left a subtle mark, softly illuminating paths yet unseen. Finally, they paused atop a drifting platform, looking across the infinite lattice of glowing threads and softly pulsing orbs. Rick let his hands hover above the map, feeling the gentle rhythm of countless possibilities. The multiverse, he whispered, is vast, yes, but it's also tender. Every hidden world, every subtle ripple, every quiet act matters infinitely, and noticing it is enough. His companion smiled faintly, eyes reflecting the soft shimmer of threads stretching into mist. So discovery isn't just about going outward, they said softly. It's about seeing, feeling, and noticing. Even small ripples count, Rick nodded. Exactly. The map shows paths, but it's the attention, the care, and the awareness we bring that give them meaning. And so, as they drifted gently along the platform, surrounded by softly pulsing threads, floating clouds, protective shadows, and shimmering orbs, Rick and his companion allowed themselves to absorb the quiet rhythm of hidden worlds. Every soft pulse, every subtle ripple, every gentle light reflected lessons of patience, empathy, reflection, and awareness. In this serene exploration, they discovered not just hidden corners of the multiverse, but the tender truth that every small act, every attentive pause, every observed ripple, carried infinite resonance across all worlds, visible or unseen. As the multiverse drifted silently around them, Rick and his companion found themselves atop a softly glowing platform, suspended above a river of liquid starlight. The corridor had slowed its rhythm, shadows leaning protectively along its edges, clouds drifting lazily above and faint orbs hovering in delicate arcs. Here the day, or whatever measured time in the multiverse, felt gentle, unhurried, like the quiet pause before a soft lullaby. In the center of the platform, a small fire glimmered. Not a fire of heat or chaos, but a flickering circle of golden light that hummed softly, resonating with the slow pulse of the multiverse. Rick and his companion settled beside it, letting its warmth ripple quietly through them. I like these moments, Rick murmured, watching the shadows curve toward the light. They remind us that presence matters more than movement, that listening matters more than talking, that the simplest gestures carry the deepest resonance. His companion nodded, wrapping their hands around the faint warmth of the fire's glow. It's like the multiverse slows down just for us sometimes, they whispered, to let us feel, reflect, and connect. Rick smiled softly. Yes, these moments aren't accidents. They're invitations to notice, to share, to be quietly present together. The fire flickered gently, sending tiny pulses of light across floating clouds and drifting platforms. Shadows leaned protectively, and faint threads of luminescent energy arched above them, connecting nearby floating orbs. Rick realized that the multiverse itself was participating in this conversation, not with words, but with presence, rhythm, and the quiet hum of awareness. Rick turned to his companion, eyes reflecting the golden glow. "Tell me," he said softly, "what have you noticed lately? Not what you think you should, but what your heart has felt." His companion paused, looking at the fire, letting its warmth seep into their chest. "I've noticed how even small gestures, holding a shadow steady, steadying a cloud, helping someone find their path, can ripple farther than I imagined. And it feels calming, like we matter in ways we can't always see." Rick nodded slowly, letting the words sink into the rhythm of the multiverse around them. Exactly. Presence, attention, empathy, they carry weight in quiet ways, and sometimes reflecting on them, talking through them, even softly by a fire, is enough to anchor that understanding. The flames flickered, illuminating faint patterns on the clouds above. Rick and his companion fell into a comfortable silence, listening to the subtle hum of the multiverse. The glowing orbs responded to their presence, pulsing gently as if acknowledging each heartbeat, each quiet exhale, each mindful observation. Even the shadows leaned closer, offering comfort without intrusion. Rick's companion glanced at him, eyes soft and reflective. "Do you think we understand enough yet?" they asked quietly. Rick considered the question, watching the fire ripple in response to their soft words. "Understanding isn't a destination," he said gently. "It's a rhythm, a flow. Sometimes it's about noticing the light in shadows, the warmth in stillness, the quiet echoes of small acts. And moments like this," he gestured to the fire and surrounding glow, "help anchor it." They spoke then in gentle turns, sharing memories of previous corridors, drifting clouds, bridges, glowing threads and tiny acts of care. Each recollection was soft and unhurried, like a lullaby unfolding slowly across the multiverse. Rick noticed how the act of sharing, without urgency or expectation, deepened their bond, softening shadows, steadying clouds, and allowing faint orbs to glow more warmly. A drifting cloud floated near, casting soft silver light over the platform. Rick reached out, letting his fingers brush its surface. The cloud shimmered in response, echoing the rhythm of their conversation. "Even the smallest attention," he said softly, "produces resonance. Our words, our gestures, our quiet presence, they ripple, not always outward, but inward into hearts, shadows, clouds, and threads." His companion leaned closer, letting the warmth of the fire and Rick's presence flow through them. "I think I understand now," they whispered. "The multiverse isn't just a place we move through. It's a space we reflect in, nurture, and notice. And every gentle conversation, every quiet act becomes part of that rhythm." Rick nodded, eyes resting on the gentle pulse of the fire. "Yes, and it's okay that it doesn't feel grand or urgent. Quiet, reflective actions often leave the deepest marks. Small words, attentive listening, a hand offered without expectation. They shape everything softly, infinitely and beautifully." They remained there, drifting in reflection, watching shadows lean, clouds drift and orbs pulse. The fire glimmered gently, sending faint arcs of light across platforms, illuminating threads of gold and silver that wove through the corridor. Rick realized that the quiet conversations themselves were acts of care, soft ripples of connection that strengthened bonds, deepened understanding, and allowed insight to settle slowly into their hearts. A faint wind lifted the edges of drifting clouds, creating a delicate dance of light and shadow. Rick and his companion watched silently, letting the rhythm settle around them. "We don't need to rush," Rick said softly. "We don't need to fix everything at once. Just being here, noticing, reflecting, and sharing, it's enough. That's how growth happens, gently, quietly." His companion smiled, eyes reflecting the shimmer of drifting orbs. "I feels at peace," they whispered. "Even with uncertainty, even with shadows or clouds lingering, I feel the rhythm. And it's comforting," Rick nodded, letting the warmth of the fire, the multiverse, and their shared presence settle into the quiet spaces between them. As stars shimmered faintly above drifting clouds and shadows, curved protectively along corridor edges, Rick realized that these moments of calm, soft conversation and reflective presence were as important as any adventure. They were the threads that wove connection, empathy, and gentle understanding into the fabric of the multiverse. And just like the fire's quiet glow, their influence would ripple softly, infinitely, beyond immediate perception. Finally, as the drifting clouds settled and the faint pulse of glowing orbs echoed around them, Rick and his companion allowed themselves to rest. Words became whispers, and whispers dissolved into the gentle hum of the multiverse. They were anchored by quiet presence, reflective conversation, and shared understanding, a small luminous ripple in a vast, serene tapestry. And as the corridors stretched infinitely ahead, filled with drifting clouds, leaning shadows, and softly pulsing orbs, Rick and his companion allowed the rhythm of quiet reflection, gentle conversations, and the soft warmth of evening fires to carry them forward, one patient, attentive step at a time. Rick and his companion drifted into a corridor where the walls shimmered with liquid reflections, as though the multiverse had lent its surface to mirrors, Clouds floated gently above, casting soft, wavering shadows. Each mirror seemed to show not only their physical forms, but subtle echoes of their growth, the quirks, oddities, and gentle acts of care that had shaped them so far. "This place," his companion murmured, fingertips brushing the reflective surface of a floating mirror. "It's like seeing all of ourselves at once. Not just what we are, but who we've become." Rick nodded slowly, watching his own reflection ripple softly in the liquid surface. "Yes, and it's not just about the past. The mirrors show what we carry forward. The lessons, the choices, the gentle acts that shape the rhythm of everything we touch. Some mirrors curved faintly, creating gentle distortions. Shadows leaned along the edges of each reflective surface, protective and still. The reflections did not feel threatening. Instead, they invited observation, contemplation, and acceptance. Rick realized that these mirrors were more than visual. They were emotional. They reflected the subtle growth, empathy, and quiet wisdom they had nurtured through countless small acts and soft observations. He gestured toward a mirror that shimmered with faint golden threads of light. "Look here," he said softly. "See how even the tiniest acts, holding a shadow steady, guiding a cloud, comforting a trembling being, show up in the reflection. Not as grand moments, but as faint, persistent light. That's the quiet strength we carry." His companion leaned closer, watching a ripple in the reflection. "It's beautiful," they whispered. "Like the multiverse is showing us, that growth isn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's subtle, slow, soft." Rick nodded. "Exactly. And noticing it, really noticing it, is part of the journey. Mirrors don't just show us what exists. They show us what matters quietly, infinitely." They wandered along the corridor, stopping before mirrors that reflected soft arcs of light, drifting clouds and protective shadows. Each mirror seemed to respond to their presence, rippling gently when they moved, pulsing faintly when they paused. Rick realized that these ripples were not distortions, but acknowledgments, the multiverse softly nodding to their attention, empathy and care. "Some mirrors are easy to look at," Rick said quietly, tracing a line across a liquid reflection. "They show the warmth, the patience, the acts of kindness. But some are harder. They show hesitation, uncertainty, or moments we wish we could redo." His companion touched a mirror that seemed to swirl faintly, reflecting a moment when tension had lingered between them. "It's okay to see those too," they said softly. "It doesn't feel bad. Just reflective." Rick smiled gently. "Yes, growth isn't only in triumphs or perfect choices. It's in noticing our doubts, our pauses, our mistakes, and allowing them to ripple into awareness rather than fear. These mirrors teach us acceptance, the quiet kind that carries through shadows, clouds and threads of light." A drifting cloud passed over the mirrors, casting soft shadows that danced along their reflections. Rick reached out, letting his hand hover above the surface of a liquid mirror that shimmered with golden light. The reflection rippled in response, showing subtle echoes of their companion's small acts of courage and empathy. "See that?" he said softly. "Even when we doubt ourselves, even when the world feels uncertain, the ripples of care remain. They shape every corridor, every shadow, every drifting cloud we touch." His companion leaned closer, watching their reflections ripple gently. "It's comforting, like the multiverse is reminding us we've mattered. Not in loud ways, but in quiet, infinite ways." Rick nodded. "Yes, and that's the truth of quiet heroism. It may not always be visible, but it leaves traces, subtle and persistent, that the mirrors, shadows and clouds can show us if we pay attention." They continued walking, observing mirrors that reflected corridors they had crossed, threads of glowing light and orbs hovering faintly nearby. Each mirror offered a soft meditation, sometimes showing past acts, sometimes reflecting gentle growth yet unseen. Shadows curved protectively, clouds drifted lazily overhead, and faint pulses of light responded to the rhythm of their steps. Rick realized that the multiverse itself seemed to mirror their internal awareness, rewarding attentiveness with gentle affirmation. At one mirror, Rick saw a faint reflection of a small act he had nearly forgotten, steadying a trembling creature on a drifting platform. The reflection shimmered in soft golden light, and he felt the ripple of that act, not outward but inward, touching hearts, shadows, clouds, and threads across corridors. "Even moments we almost overlook," he whispered, "carry resonance, and noticing them allows us to carry their lessons forward." His companion smiled, reaching toward a mirror that reflected subtle arcs of light from earlier adventures. "It feels like everything we've done has left gentle footprints," they said softly. "Not marks on walls or floors, but impressions in the rhythm of the multiverse itself." Rick nodded. "Exactly. Every choice, every gesture, every quiet pause leaves ripples that echo infinitely. And the mirrors remind us to see them, honor them, and learn from them." They paused before a particularly large mirror that shimmered like liquid starlight, reflecting both of them in soft, elongated arcs. Rick rested his hand lightly on the surface, feeling the quiet pulse beneath his fingers. "These reflections," he murmured, "aren't about perfection or achievement. They're about presence, understanding, and the ability to notice the ripples we create, however subtle." His companion leaned their forehead against the mirror, eyes closed. "It's meditative," they whispered. "Like seeing all our lessons, doubts, and acts of care at once. And feeling whole." Rick nodded. Letting the glow of the mirror, the leaning shadows, and drifting clouds settle into a calm rhythm around them. As they drifted further down the corridor, observing reflections in mirrors of all shapes and sizes, Rick realized that this was the essence of reflection, seeing the past, present, and potential with gentle attention, embracing growth without urgency, and understanding that the multiverse, like their hearts, carried lessons in subtle ripples, not dramatic leaps. Finally, they paused atop a floating platform, surrounded by mirrors that shimmered softly, clouds drifting above, shadows curving protectively, and threads of light arching gracefully. Rick let the gentle pulse of reflections wash over him. "The mirrors show us not just what we are, but who we are becoming. And that's enough. Every ripple, every act, every gentle observation carries forward infinitely." His companion smiled faintly, eyes reflecting the liquid shimmer of mirrors. "I think I understand now," they said softly. "Growth isn't loud. It's subtle, quiet, reflective, and noticing it is part of the rhythm of everything." Rick nodded, feeling the calm resonance of the multiverse settle around them, the reflections reinforcing their quiet awareness, and the drifting clouds and protective shadows echoing gentle affirmation. And as the corridor stretched ahead, filled with floating mirrors, glowing threads, drifting clouds, and leaning shadows, Rick and his companion allowed themselves to rest in the meditative rhythm of reflection, carrying the gentle awareness of all they had seen, done, and noticed. Across dimensions, threads, and softly glowing worlds, the multiverse, for all its gentle glow and drifting corridors, sometimes held moments of uncertainty, soft, pervasive clouds that obscured both sight and feeling. Rick and his companion found themselves walking along a path where the drifting clouds above thickened, muting the faint glow of nearby orbs and casting subtle shadows across the corridor. It was not dangerous, but it was heavy with introspection, the kind of pause that invited reflection rather than motion. "This path feels different," his companion murmured, letting a hand hover over a drifting cloud. "Like we're carrying more than we should." Rick nodded slowly, feeling the weight himself. "Yes," he whispered. "Some corridors carry not just light, but the echoes of our hearts. This is one of those paths, a place where the clouds reflect doubt, uncertainty, moments we haven't fully understood." The drifting clouds swirled softly above them, casting faint shadows that curved protectively along the corridor. Rick realized that these clouds were not obstacles, but mirrors of subtle internal struggles. Every hesitation, every worry, every quiet fear had coalesced here into a soft haze, inviting awareness rather than avoidance. He reached out, letting his fingers brush the edge of a thick cloud. The mist pulsed faintly, acknowledging their presence. "We don't have to rush through it," Rick murmured. "The clouds aren't meant to frighten or halt us. They're here to guide us, through patience, observation, and quiet care. The multiverse, and ourselves, benefit from mindful reflection." They walked slowly, each step deliberate, letting the rhythm of the corridor carry them forward. Shadows leaned closer, protective yet unobtrusive. The clouds above shifted gently, curling and unfurling like soft smoke, reflecting the quiet uncertainties that had lingered between them. Between their past choices and within themselves, Rick paused near a drifting orb, its glow dimmed slightly by the cloud cover. "Even small doubts," he said softly, "can feel heavy. And that's okay. Not every ripple of uncertainty needs immediate resolution. Some simply need to be acknowledged, observed, and allowed to flow. His companion nodded, tracing a finger along the faint pulse of light beneath the orb. "It's strange," they murmured. "The clouds feel like obstacles, but also like reminders. Gentle ones. Reminders of what we've learned and what we still need to notice." Rick smiled faintly. "Exactly. Reflection doesn't always feel clear. Sometimes it's thick, soft, and clouded. But moving with it rather than against it, that's how insight forms." They continued, passing faintly glowing threads that weaved through the mist. Some threads reflected past acts of care, stabilized shadows, steadying clouds, moments of quiet presence. Others pulsed with possibilities yet unseen, whispering invitations to explore, to notice, and to respond with gentle mindfulness. Every thread, every cloud, every shadow carried echoes of the quiet ripples they had created throughout the multiverse. A drifting platform ahead shifted slightly under the weight of the clouds. Rick and his companion paused, letting the motion settle. "Even when the path seems unclear," Rick said softly, "we can move carefully, attentively. Step by step. Notice the clouds, let them shift, let the shadows guide. And we grow with each movement, each reflection, each quiet act of patience." His companion smiled faintly, watching the clouds swirl above. "It feels like learning to trust the rhythm, not to force clarity, but to move with it. Even if we can't see everything, we can still feel our way forward." Rick nodded. "Yes, the clouded path isn't about seeing the end. It's about presence, awareness, and the soft courage to continue, even when things are uncertain." They reached a narrow corridor where shadows leaned close, protective and calm. Faint threads of light pulsed gently beneath drifting clouds, guiding their steps. Rick observed that the corridor itself seemed to breathe with the rhythm of reflection. Thick clouds, subtle light, soft shadows, all weaving a tapestry of awareness. "Notice," he whispered, "how even the heaviest clouds eventually part, just enough for light to filter through. That's always the rhythm. Patience, care, and presence." A small orb floated near, shimmering faintly through the mist. Rick reached out, letting a finger brush its surface. The orb pulsed in response, faintly illuminating the path ahead. "Even small gestures," he said softly, "make a difference. A ripple of attention, a quiet act of care, a moment of observation. These shift the clouds, reveal threads, and allow understanding to emerge." His companion watched the orb, letting its faint glow wash over them. "I think I understand now," they whispered. "Even when the path is clouded, even when we feel uncertain, noticing, being present, and caring gently, that's enough. That's always enough." Rick nodded, feeling the rhythm of the multiverse settle around them. Clouds above, shadows alongside, threads of light beneath, all in quiet harmony. They moved slowly, letting each step carry them through soft mist and protective shadows. Every pause allowed reflection. Every gentle touch of a cloud or orb released subtle illumination, and every shared glance reinforced the bond they had nurtured across corridors, threads, clouds, and shadows. Rick realized that internal challenges, like clouded paths, were not obstacles to avoid, but landscapes to explore with patience, awareness, and quiet courage. Finally, they reached the end of the clouded corridor, where drifting clouds thinned and soft light shimmered across floating platforms. Shadows leaned gently along the edges, and faint threads of glowing energy arched gracefully overhead. Rick took a deep breath, letting the calm resonance of the path settle within him. "The clouds have passed, or at least shifted," he said softly. "Not because we forced them, but because we moved with them. Not because we hurried, but because we were present, mindful, and attentive." His companion smiled faintly, eyes reflecting the soft glow of the clearing corridor. "It's comforting," they whispered. "Even the clouded paths have their purpose. They show us growth, patience, and quiet strength." Rick nodded. "Exactly. Every cloud, every shadow, every thread carries a lesson. And noticing them gently, without urgency, allows us to carry those lessons forward softly, infinitely." As they stepped onto the final platform, letting the rhythm of drifting clouds, leaning shadows, and glowing threads settle around them, Rick and his companion allowed themselves to rest. The clouded path had shown them that internal challenges were part of the journey. That reflection was a slow and patient process, and that quiet presence, mindful observation, and gentle action could navigate even the densest uncertainty. and as the multiverse stretched infinitely ahead, filled with clouds, shadows, threads of light and softly pulsing orbs, Rick and his companion carried the calm, patient rhythm of the clouded path within them, ready to move forward, attentive, reflective, and quietly brave. The corridors of the multiverse often held echoes, soft vibrations of past moments, gentle ripples of old choices, and faint glimmers of memories that had left subtle imprints. Today, Rick and his companion wandered among these echoes, drifting along a corridor woven from threads of golden light and soft mist. Every step seemed to stir the threads, revealing glimpses of the past, faint shadows of moments both tender and unremarkable, yet infinitely significant. Rick paused to observe a faintly glowing thread that arched gently across the corridor. "Every memory," he whispered softly, "is like a thread. Alone it may seem fragile, but woven together, they create a tapestry, soft, luminous, and alive with echoes of who we are and who we've been." His companion watched the thread ripple under Rick's gentle touch. "I see it," they murmured. "Every small act, every quiet thought, it's all here, shaping the rhythm of the multiverse, of ourselves." Drifting clouds floated above, their silver edges brushing lightly against leaning shadows. Faint orbs pulsed softly in sync with the rhythm of memory threads. Rick realized that these echoes were not bound by time as mortals understood it. A moment from yesterday, a reflection from years past, and a soft intuition from a future yet unseen coexisted in delicate harmony, overlapping without confusion. They moved slowly, observing a series of threads that shimmered with warm hues, faintly illuminating shadows along the corridor. One thread held the memory of a gentle gesture, a small creature steadied atop a drifting platform. Another pulsed softly with laughter, shared by Rick and his companion across glowing corridors. Each memory was a quiet act of care, a gentle reflection, a reminder of the resonance of their presence in the multiverse. Rick reached toward a thread that shimmered faintly with silver and gold. "Some memories are vivid," he said softly, "like light piercing through clouds. Others are subtler, almost imperceptible, but every thread carries weight, meaning, and quiet lessons. And the more we notice, the more the threads form a tapestry that supports us, shapes us, and comforts us." His companion leaned closer to a drifting cloud that mirrored a faint memory of shared warmth from an earlier platform. "It's soothing," they whispered. "Even the faintest moments feel like they're part of something larger. Like we're never truly alone in the multiverse, because everything we've experienced echoes." Rick nodded. "Exactly. The threads of memory remind us that we are connected to each other, to the corridors we've walked, to the clouds and shadows, and even to the smallest ripples we've left behind." As they wandered further, Rick noticed threads that pulsed faintly with lessons learned through subtle acts of reflection. One thread showed a moment of quiet reconciliation, when tension had been acknowledged rather than ignored. Another revealed a gentle act of patience, holding back words, observing a shadow, or letting a cloud drift without interference. Each ripple, each memory carried soft resonance, reinforcing the idea that growth is cumulative, quiet, and infinitely patient. Drifting clouds moved in harmony above them, casting faint silver shadows across the corridor. Rick paused to watch the clouds, noting how they interacted with the threads of memory below. "Even the clouds," he murmured, "remember. They reflect not only what we've done, but how we've felt. Shadows. Clouds, threads, they all carry echoes, and noticing them allows insight to ripple quietly through our hearts." His companion reached out to touch a golden thread that pulsed faintly beneath a drifting orb. "It feels like walking through our own story," they said softly. "Every choice, every quiet gesture, it's all here, and it's comforting to see how even small acts matter." Rick smiled, letting the warmth of reflection settle in. "Yes, the multiverse doesn't just show us the extraordinary. It shows us the ordinary, the subtle, the gentle acts, and often those are the ones that leave the deepest ripples." They paused before a larger cluster of threads, each overlapping and shimmering with faint colors. Shadows leaned protectively along the edges, and soft clouds drifted lazily above. Rick observed the threads ripple as they approached, showing moments that had once seemed fleeting. A quiet smile, a supportive gesture, a careful observation of a drifting cloud. "Even the moments we forget," he said softly, "carry significance, and sometimes revisiting them helps us understand how far we've come." His companion watched a thread shimmer with soft light, reflecting a memory of laughter shared on a floating platform. "It's like a lullaby," they murmured. "Soft, repetitive, gentle. Each thread hums its own quiet song, and together they create something beautiful and calming." Rick nodded. "Yes, memories are lullabies for the soul if we allow them to be. Not loud or demanding, just soft and steady, reminding us of connection, presence, and care." They continued along the corridor, letting the threads of memory guide their awareness. Rick noticed how some threads pulsed faintly with acts that had seemed insignificant at the time. A hand steadied, a word held back, a cloud left to drift undisturbed, but whose echoes had shaped the multiverse in subtle ways. "Even the smallest ripples matter," he said softly. "They intersect, overlap, and create patterns that carry meaning far beyond immediate perception." His companion smiled faintly, eyes reflecting drifting clouds and glowing threads. "I think I understand now," they whispered. "The multiverse doesn't just carry what we do outward. It reflects what we notice, how we feel, and the care we give." Quietly, patiently, Rick nodded. "Exactly. And by walking through these threads, by noticing them, we allow the echoes to settle gently, forming a tapestry of understanding and calm." Finally, they paused atop a drifting platform where threads of memory converged softly. Clouds moved above, shadows leaned protectively, and faint orbs pulsed in harmony with the rhythm of their reflection. Rick reached out, letting his hand hover above a cluster of threads. "The threads of memory," he murmured, "aren't just about the past. They shape the present, illuminate the path forward, and remind us that every quiet act, every reflection, and every gentle gesture carries resonance." His companion leaned close, resting a hand atop his. "It's comforting," they said softly. "Even moments that seemed small, even doubts or mistakes, they all form a rhythm, and we're part of it." "We're part of the harmony," Rick smiled, letting the warmth of shared presence, drifting clouds, leaning shadows, and softly glowing threads settle in, and as the multiverse stretched infinitely ahead, filled with threads of memory, softly drifting clouds, protective shadows, and glowing orbs, Rick and his companion allowed themselves to rest in the calm resonance of the echoes. Every ripple of past care, every gentle observation, every quiet reflection intertwined, creating a meditative rhythm that carried forward. Softly, infinitely, and peacefully, the multiverse stretched endlessly above Rick and his companion, a vast expanse of floating threads, drifting clouds, and softly glowing orbs. Tonight, or whatever measure of time existed here, the skies were filled with stars, each one shimmering faintly with a quiet, steady rhythm. Some stars pulsed gently, like soft heartbeats, while others lingered silently, tracing arcs of reflection across drifting shadows. Beneath this infinite canopy, the world seemed to breathe slowly, patiently, inviting them to simply exist within its calm embrace. Rick lifted his gaze, eyes reflecting the faint glow of countless stars. "Look at them," he whispered softly, "all of them shining quietly in the darkness. Some are close, some far, some barely visible. But each one carries light, and even the faintest contributes to the rhythm of the whole." His companion leaned against a softly pulsing thread, fingers brushing a drifting cloud. "It feels infinite," they murmured. "Like we're small, but somehow connected, part of something gentle and enduring." Rick nodded. "Exactly. Small acts, small gestures, quiet presence. They echo through corridors, threads, and stars alike. Everything matters, in ways that are often unseen but always real." They drifted along a softly glowing platform, shadows leaning protectively, clouds swirling gently above, and threads of light arching across the distance. Each step carried them farther from hurried concerns, closer to reflective awareness. Rick noticed how even faint actions, offering a hand, steadying a trembling cloud, sharing a word without urgency, created subtle ripples in the rhythm of stars, threads, and drifting orbs. "Do you think the stars remember us?" his companion asked softly, eyes tracing arcs of light above. Rick smiled faintly. "Perhaps. Not as we imagine memory, but as echoes of presence. Every quiet act, every gentle reflection, every attentive pause leaves traces. And perhaps the stars, clouds, threads, and shadows carry them indefinitely." Above, drifting clouds brushed against faint arcs of golden light, casting silvered reflections across the corridor. Rick felt the familiar pulse of calm wonder, that always accompanied starry vistas. Soft awe without urgency, the sense that the multiverse was vast, mysterious, and tender, a space where even quiet moments held infinite resonance. They stopped atop a gently swaying platform, gazing at a cluster of stars that shimmered faintly like a scattered constellation of memories. Rick reached out toward one, fingers hovering above its light. "See that?" he whispered. "Even the smallest stars, the faintest threads, they ripple with echoes of care, presence, and reflection. Each one reminds us that our choices, our gentle acts, our soft attention, all matter, across spaces seen and unseen." His companion let their hand hover above a drifting cloud that reflected the shimmer of a distant star. "It's like we're threads too," they murmured. "Our presence, our care, our quiet acts, woven into everything around us." Into the stars, the clouds, the shadows, the multiverse itself. Rick nodded slowly. "Yes, and noticing it is enough. Being aware, present, reflective, that's the rhythm that matters." Above, a faint pulse traced a slow arc across the sky, and Rick realized that the stars themselves seemed to respond to their awareness. Shadows leaned protectively, threads of light arched softly overhead, and drifting clouds carried subtle luminescence. The multiverse was alive with quiet resonance, a network of small, persistent echoes that spoke in rhythm rather than words. They moved along a path lined with softly pulsing orbs, each one reflecting faint images of corridors, mirrors, threads, and clouds they had traversed. "Even the smallest memories, gestures, and reflections," Rick whispered, "contribute to this vast harmony. Each act of care, every attentive pause is like a star's pulse, small, quiet, but infinitely enduring." His companion smiled faintly, eyes reflecting softly pulsing light. "I think I understand now," they said softly. "The stars, the clouds, the shadows. Everything carries echoes of us, of our choices, our care, our presence. And even when we can't see the impact, it exists quietly." Rick nodded, letting the calm resonance of the multiverse settle around him. "Exactly. We are part of it all, and noticing, reflecting, and moving gently. That's how we honor it." They paused beneath a particularly bright cluster of stars that shimmered like liquid gold, arcs of faint light rippling gently across drifting clouds. Rick felt a sense of soft awe, not loud or urgent, but quietly profound. "Look at how the light travels," he whispered. "Some of it reaches us directly, some indirectly. Some ripples take time, some travel unseen, but all of it contributes to the beauty of the whole." His companion traced a finger along a faint thread, connecting drifting clouds to glowing stars. "It's like everything we do matters, whether we notice it or not," they said softly. "Even the smallest acts, they ripple endlessly across worlds, threads, and stars." Rick smiled. "Yes, and that's the quiet heroism of being present. Quiet, reflective, patient, and infinitely gentle." They drifted further along the platform, letting the rhythm of stars, threads, clouds, and shadows wash over them. Rick reflected on the countless moments, small gestures, quiet reflections, attentive pauses that had carried them this far. Each act, however minor, had left ripples across the corridors, drifting clouds and softly pulsing threads of the multiverse. Each ripple was now mirrored in the gentle pulse of stars above. As they paused to watch a faint meteor trace an arc across the sky, Rick whispered softly, "Even fleeting moments, seen or unseen, matter. Every gentle choice, every act of care, every quiet reflection leaves a subtle mark that echoes infinitely. We are part of that rhythm, whether we notice it or not." His companion leaned against him lightly, letting the warmth of presence, drifting clouds, protective shadows, and softly glowing threads settle in. "It feels safe," they murmured. "Even vast, infinite spaces feel comforting when we know that everything we do, everything we care for, resonates gently across it all." Rick nodded, letting the calm pulse of stars, clouds, shadows, and threads sink into their hearts. Finally, they paused on a softly glowing platform, letting the rhythm of the multiverse carry them forward. The stars above pulsed in quiet harmony. The drifting clouds shimmered with silver and gold, and faint threads of light arched gently overhead. Rick and his companion allowed themselves to rest beneath the infinite stars, letting the calm awe, gentle reflection, and quiet resonance of countless acts of care settle fully within them. And as the multiverse stretched infinitely ahead, filled with softly pulsing stars, drifting clouds, leaning shadows, and glowing threads, Rick and his companion carried the gentle rhythm of awareness, quiet acts of love, and reflective presence into every corridor, every floating platform, and every softly shimmering world calmly, endlessly, and peacefully. Rick and his companion drifted into a vast expanse where the multiverse felt almost like a gentle ocean of light. Floating platforms stretched infinitely in all directions, threads of luminescence weaving softly between stars, clouds drifting lazily, and shadows curving protectively across the edges. It was quiet, meditative, and infinite, the perfect space to pause, reflect, and breathe. Rick lifted his gaze to the skies above, where constellations shimmered with a rhythm that felt both familiar and tender. "It's remarkable," he whispered softly, "how everything we've experienced, every small gesture, every quiet act of care, ripples outward, carrying resonance across corridors, clouds, shadows, threads, and stars. And here, in this calm, infinite space, we can feel it fully." His companion smiled faintly, letting the warmth of presence drifting clouds and glowing threads wash over them. "It feels like everything matters," they murmured. "Even the tiniest ripple, every soft gesture or reflection. It's all part of the same rhythm." Rick nodded. "Exactly. That's the quiet beauty of the multiverse. You don't always see the ripples, but they exist. And knowing that, carrying it with care, that's what makes the journey meaningful." They floated further, guided by faint threads of golden light that arched gracefully across drifting clouds. Shadows leaned protectively along the edges, and softly glowing orbs pulsed in time with the rhythm of the multiverse. Every step was deliberate, meditative, reflecting on corridors traversed, memories gathered, and lessons softly learned. Rick reached toward a faintly shimmering thread, brushing it gently with his fingers. The light pulsed in response, rippling outward across nearby clouds and shadows. "Even now," he said softly, "we can feel the echoes of our past actions, the threads of care we've left behind, the small acts that seemed almost invisible at the time. They're all here, woven into the fabric of this place, shaping it quietly, infinitely." His companion leaned close, letting the gentle pulse of light and warmth settle into their chest. "It's comforting," they whispered. "Even as the multiverse stretches endlessly, the echoes of what we've done, they make it feel connected, intimate, and safe." Rick smiled softly. "Yes, infinite spaces don't have to feel lonely. Each act of presence, every gesture of care, every mindful reflection, it anchors us in the vastness, linking heart to heart, shadow to cloud, thread to star." Above them, drifting clouds shimmered silver and gold, casting gentle reflections across the platforms. Rick noticed how even the faintest light, threads that had seemed almost imperceptible, rippled across distant stars and shadows. "The multiverse has a way of showing us that quiet actions matter," he murmured. "Even when we don't see the impact immediately, it exists, softly, infinitely." His companion reached toward a softly glowing orb, watching it pulse in time with the faint rhythm of threads above. "I see now," they said softly. "Every act, every gesture, every quiet moment, they're part of a pattern, a rhythm, something bigger than us yet intimately connected." Rick nodded. "Exactly. And stretching into the cosmos, we realize that it's not about grandeur or drama. It's about presence, reflection, care, and the quiet resonance of gentle acts." They floated farther, drifting alongside faint arcs of golden light and softly pulsing orbs. Shadows curved protectively. Clouds moved lazily in a rhythm of their own, and stars shimmered across infinite expanses. Rick felt the gentle exhale of the multiverse, the calm awareness that even in infinite space, every ripple, every echo, and every quiet gesture had its place and purpose. At the center of the expanse, a cluster of softly glowing threads arched like a bridge toward the stars. Rick extended his hands, letting them hover above the threads. "These threads," he said softly, "are not just light. They are echoes of care, moments of reflection, acts of love, and the gentle rhythm of existence itself. Stretching into the cosmos, we become part of that rhythm." His companion rested a hand atop his, letting the warm pulse of the threads, drifting clouds, and softly glowing orbs merge into a quiet harmony. "It feels infinite but also intimate," they whispered. "Like everything we've experienced, everything we've done, it's all part of something tender and eternal." Rick nodded. "Yes, and that's the quiet truth of this journey. Every ripple, every reflection, every moment of care matters infinitely. They drifted into the center of the cosmos, surrounded by softly glowing platforms, golden threads, drifting clouds, and protective shadows. Rick and his companion allowed themselves to float, letting the rhythm of the multiverse, the gentle pulse of light, and the warmth of shared presence wash over them. Every soft reflection, every echo of care, and every quiet observation merged into a meditative harmony, a rhythm that stretched infinitely outward while grounding them in the present moment. Rick closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the threads of memory, drifting clouds, glowing orbs, and leaning shadows settle around them. Stretching into the cosmos, he murmured, we carry every quiet act, every gentle gesture, every thoughtful reflection with us. They ripple outward, shaping the multiverse, our hearts, and everything in between. His companion leaned back against a softly glowing platform, watching stars pulse faintly above. And even though it's infinite, they said softly, it feels safe. Like every ripple has a place and every act matters. We're part of it. Connected quietly, endlessly, Rick nodded, letting the warmth of the multiverse settle fully around them. Finally, they allowed themselves to float, arms extended toward the softly glowing threads and drifting clouds, hearts open to the quiet resonance of countless ripples. Rick exhaled slowly, feeling the gentle pulse of stars, shadows, clouds, and threads synchronize with their own rhythm. The multiverse, vast and tender, wrapped around them like a lullaby, and as Rick stretched, extending his arms and heart toward the soft, infinite expanse, he whispered softly, and with that he stretched into the stars. A gentle pause followed, letting the multiverse hum its quiet, reflective lullaby. Floating clouds drifted lazily, shadows leaned protectively, threads of light pulsed softly, and stars shimmered in calm, steady rhythm. Every ripple, every echo, and every gentle act of presence resonated infinitely, softly, and peacefully. Thanks for spending this time with us. Sleep well. Everything's going to be okay, man.